IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. That dude's Ryan Roberts. You know who I am. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here, Ryan, to talk some Notre Dame football. It is our Wednesday midweek rundown, so we have some really fun topics to talk about. Ryan and I were discussing them today, and there's just so much to discuss right now. But what today, Ryan, we're going to talk about is obviously Notre Dame landed a big commitment this past, actually several this past week. Notre Dame has landed 6 players since the week of the Blue Gold game, 5 in the 2024 class, and then 1 in the 2026 class or 25 class. Getting a little ahead of myself. We did have an interview with a 2026 quarterback today. Well, Ryan did. I shouldn't say we. He did all the work.
I love interviewing 14-year-olds, man.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird. But we're going to talk a little recruiting today, and we're going to talk about several topics. Number one is, what's the finish got to look like for Notre Dame, right? Off to a great start, top 5 class. I think right now, I'm going to check it real quick, but I think they are number 3 on Rivals. I think they're number 4 on 24/7 Sports. No one cares what the on-3 rankings are, but let me just check what those are real quick. So and Rivals, Notre Dame is currently 3rd, right behind Ohio State and Michigan at number 1, ahead of LSU and Georgia, who are 4 and 5. Notre Dame is also, when you look at the 247 team rankings, the composite, they are 4th, just behind Georgia. And then, of course, Ohio State and Michigan are 1 and 2. They're ahead of LSU and Penn State. So obviously Notre Dame's doing well right now, Ryan. If you look at their average star rankings, also a very solid number right now. Notre Dame is doing very well, in my opinion, when you look at those things, when you look at kind of how they're stacking up against some of those other teams. So let's kind of dive into today how they're going to finish, maybe talk about some potential surprises that we could see maybe come signing day, what would need to happen for that to happen. We're going to get into some team conversation. We're going to talk about which spring breakout players did we see that either flashed breakout or were just pure breakouts. Which ones are most important to this team in the fall for them to continue that success into the fall? And then the third topic is we're going to talk about the transfers. We're going to talk about the players at Notre Dame that transferred out and sort of what are the concerns about those players leaving, not about the concerns about the team or if there's an issue. We all understand why they left, and I have no issue with why they left. I don't necessarily agree with every player that left as far as whether it was or was not the right decision, in my opinion. But I think none of them were any, there's a problem at Notre Dame that has to get addressed. It's just this is the problem of college football, and Notre Dame is no different than everyone else. But more so looking at it practically, what are the concerns about each of them leaving? We'll talk about Buckner and Diggs and Styles and Colley, since those are the guys that are the kind of the post-spring guys that left. I'll be honest, I'm surprised more guys didn't leave, to be completely honest with you. I'm surprised more guys that are a little bit buried in the depth chart didn't leave. I think that, if anything, shows a little bit more good health of the program, that the only guys that left are guys that got beat out by other people, or I think in Logan Diggs' case, that's just been an issue for him since he got to Notre Dame. It is what it is, just wants to be closer to home. I got no ill will for the kid. Played his butt off for Notre Dame this past year. It is what it is. What are the concerns, though? Practical concerns about them leaving. And then also what needs to happen at Notre Dame for them to be okay with those guys leaving? Because I think there needs to be a fair conversation, right? It's not so, wow, they're loaded there. Well, they're loaded there if ... Right. Certain things happen, right? But if certain things don't happen, then it is problematic. And so we don't need to overreact to guys leaving, but we can also underreact at times. So we're going to kind of look at it from both angles today. And talk about that from a transfer standpoint as well, right? But I want to start off with some recruiting. I know that makes you happy. I want to talk about, obviously, right now Notre Dame is on the verge of they're building really a third straight really good recruiting class and a second straight really balanced, really good recruiting class. The reason I say that is I think the 2022 class was very good, but it had holes. No safety in that class. Only one wide receiver. Quality quarterback, but not to the degree, in my opinion, that they've gotten in the couple classes later, unless Steve Angeli proves me wrong, which I hope he does, because I like the kid. I think he's a great kid. Just, I don't see it. I got to be honest. I don't see it on film. I don't see that tools. But there were some misses in that class, Ryan, at certain spots. but it was still a good, strong top 10 class. Last year's class, as everybody knows, I view that as a top 5 class. I don't care what the rankings say. There are not more than 5. You could argue 6, but that's as far as I go about classes that I would trade for Notre Dame's. That's how I evaluate it. Like, who would I trade for Notre Dame's? And there's not that many. They're in the process of building another one, Ryan, but it will be determined by how they finish. So we're going to talk about the areas where we're really confident where things are, and then the areas where there's some legitimate concern about how they're going to finish, and then talk about some surprises. But when we first look at it, Ryan, there's no doubt they're in the process of once again building a really, really good class. And the key, we've always said, you've got to stack them on top. Yes. And that's what the staff is in the middle of doing right now with the 2024 class.
I mean, again, there's some positions that are perfect examples of that, which obviously we'll get into, Brian. But like for me, it's like if you have one great recruiting class and then you're just average the next couple of years, there's going to be once in a blue moon where you are a really good football team because everything aligns and everything hits, you know, like, I mean, we saw it with LSU over the course of their career. It's like 2019, fantastic. 2018, not quite as good. 2020, not quite as good. Like you can always hit when you have one supreme recruiting class. The teams, though, that are sustainable, the teams that on a year-to-year basis are really good football teams, you think about Georgia, you think about Alabama, you think about Ohio State even, like putting them into that conversation, right? The teams that recruit quality talent on a year-in and year basis, because you have to ask yourself of why do they keep recruiting that way, right? One, they keep winning. Two, a lot of the players are comfortable with how players before them were developed, right? Like we could say, oh, we want about the Ohio State quarterback thing go into the NFL, right? About that stigma, but it's a very easy sell for CJ Stroud to go to Ohio State when the guy before him is Justin Fields, for instance, right? It's like,
well,
wow,
and the guy before him was Dwayne Haskins, right?
Exactly.
I mean, exactly, yes.
I mean, because we talked about the Ryan Wingo thing yesterday. It's like, yeah, Ryan Wingo is hesitant on Notre Dame, for instance, because it's like, I don't want to be the next, insert player that was good player at Notre Dame, but maybe not an elite player at Notre Dame. I want to be the Jerry Judys of the world, right? I want to be those first round draft picks that are going to be developed in college and are potentially, going to be the Jamar Chases of the world at the next level. Like that's the trajectory they're looking at. So it's not a coincidence that the really good football teams continue to recruit very well because winning matters and development matters. And that's what Notre Dame is trying to show. We'll talk about wide receiver here today, for instance, but Notre Dame is recruiting at a high level at wide receiver, for instance, despite not having a ton of production at that position over the last couple of years, despite still trying to turn it to the next level. So when you look at that, I think that there's obviously not coincidences there, but Notre Dame, I think, is trying to really stack not only the strong positions, but really trying to turn the tide and what people's perceptions are of certain positions, which I think will help moving forward, obviously.
Let's talk about where Notre Dame is strong right now, right? What's the foundation of this class so far? Obviously, you've got a big-time quarterback and 5-star on the IB board, a guy that is, I think, a top 40 player according to everyone except for On3, who's a little wacky with some of their rankings, obviously. And it's not an anti-Notre Dame thing because they have Anthony Knapp much higher than I do. They have Isaiah Canyon ranked higher than anybody else by a mile. So it's not an anti-Notre Dame thing. I just don't think their rankings are consistent or make any sense. There's a ton of hypocrisy. Contradictions, I should say, is probably a better term in how they do things. But 5-star quarterback, now a big-time receiving class. All right, it was Cam Williams for like 10 months of just Cam Williams, and now it's outstanding. You've got Cam Williams, Isaiah Canyon, and now Micah Gilbert. You have a very good tight end, one of the best hands in the country at tight end. You have a very good corner class, or at least the potential of a good corner class. One guy I really like, another guy in Carson Hobbs, I'm not as high on. I just have to be honest, I'm not as high on other people of the film, but people who I really trust to evaluate corners, even more than I trust myself in some regards, are very high on Carson Hobbs. So, there's a lot of excitement, I think, on the Notre Dame end about that 1-2 punch at cornerback. And the defensive line class also has taken a big jump in the last couple of weeks, adding Cole Mullins and Bryce Young on top of Owen Wafel. Now, for me, Ryan, the 2 highest ranked guys I have in this class on defense are both defensive linemen right now. Cole Mullins is my number 1 guy. Owen Wafel is my number 2 guy. And then I have Leonard Moore, number 3. So I'm very high on those two players. I'm much higher on Owen Wafel than other people. I know you are also, because you've always been very high on Owen Wafel. I had to kind of come around after his junior year. You've been like, hey, I see a lot of potential in this kid from day one.
Yeah.
So when I look at it, I say, look, those are the strengths so far. Okay, so but what is going to need to be the finish? Because if Notre Dame doesn't finish strong, this number 3, number 4 ranked class becomes number 14, just like that, if they don't finish well. So let's talk about the areas right now where the finish is important, Ryan, and the areas where we are confident that Notre Dame will, in our opinion, finish well. And right now, the position where I'm the most confident that Notre Dame's going to finish well is a position that we've been very hard on and concerned about in the past, and it's the defensive line. When you look at the board right now, Ryan, closing is needed, but I feel as far as a position where more is needed, they could stop recruiting receivers right now, and it's an excellent class, right? D-line, more is needed. We're going to focus on the positions where more is needed. That is a position as of right now, of all the positions I look at, Ryan, I'm probably most confident right now with where things stand that the next 2 guys on the board, because 5 is the minimum, the next 2 guys on the board are going to be really good football players. Much more confident now than I was even 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Smith twins who are good players, but, are they really needle movers? And now the class looks completely different, and they're in position to really finish strong. So I think that's where we have to begin, and not just from a recruiting ranking standpoint, which I don't really care about. I'm more talking about, are you putting a championship football team on the field? Finishing strong on the defensive line is of the utmost importance for importance of Notre Dame, the 24 class. And I'm a whole lot more confident they're going to finish strong now than I was a month ago. And that's big for Notre Dame.
You know what's funny about recruiting rankings real quick, though, is that when Owen Wafel committed to Notre Dame, I remember he was considered a top 200 recruit by at least one service. And then he goes out and has a dominant junior year. And all of a sudden he's a 3-star by basically everyone, which is just absolutely hysterical to me. It really is just how some of this recruiting stuff works as far as the rankings perspective. But I'll say this, Brian. This is why I don't like the crystal ball stuff at times, right? Because 2 months ago, everyone's telling you this is going to be TJ Lindsey. This is going to be the Smith twins. Like, they're going to be in the Notre Dame class, right? And then we know things change, and they change very, very quickly. And the concerns that we had with the recruitment on the side of Al Washington and the defensive line staff, right, was troubling, to say the least, for a while there, because let's look at the indicators here, right? 2 of the more talented players on the board. Let's go with Justin Scott. For a while there, it was trending in a terrible direction with Justin Scott. And you're just like, man, that is a massive miss if you can't get a 5-star defensive lineman out of the city of Chicago, not the state of Chicago, the city of Chicago.
At a Catholic school, a high academic Catholic school. Yeah.
Whose family is very pro Notre Dame in the academics piece and staying closer to home piece. Like, there's a lot of things that align there. Now, flash forward to the present day, there's still a battle that needs to happen with Justin Scott, but you feel better about that battle right now than what you did, a couple months ago, as far as where it was trending. And then Elijah Rushing's another big thing, right? And it's not even the fact that, like, us predicting that they'll get Elijah Rushing in the end. I really just think that it is very telling and very positive the fact that Notre Dame has put themselves back in the position with Elijah Rushing. The fact that he is going on an official visit, whether they eventually land Elijah Rushing or not, for a while there, you just weren't hearing anything from the 2 sides about the optimism for one another, right? And then all of a sudden, Elijah Rushing, who's been on a visit to Notre Dame, an unofficial visit, who now has an official visit to Notre Dame. And then I hear a couple days ago that Elijah basically said Notre Dame is recruiting me as hard or harder than just about anybody that is recruiting me. So
he said that to you. So this isn't something that we saw somewhere else. He said that to you specifically.
Yes. Directly. Yeah. So the fact that you are in a good position with 1 5-star defensive lineman and then in another elite defensive lineman in the class, you are still battling with, and it's being received well by a guy like Elijah Rushing. And then the simple fact of, hey, a couple months ago, you had 1 commit in the class on the defensive line, and that was the only commit in the class for a long time. All of a sudden, you look and you say, Bryce Young, Cole Mullins. Now it's like, if you get Justin Scott and then you land one of, not even including Elijah Rushing for a second, but if you land one of Logan Thomas, who they're in a much better position with than they once were, or a Malachi Williams out of Pennsylvania, who's another kid that Notre Dame is in a much better position than they were a couple months ago after the visit for the blue gold game, you look at that and say, man, like if you end up with Owen Wafel, Justin Scott, Bryce Young, Cole Mullins, and then one of the three other names that I mentioned, that's a dang good class, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's really good.
I want to address a couple things about this, Ryan. Number one is there's a narrative going on our board to a degree of people saying, well, you should take back the things you said about Al Washington, or it was overstated. I said, no, it wasn't. And I think by trying to kind of retcon what had happened in the past, you're actually taking away from what he's doing now.
Yeah.
There's, well, look, it was his first year and the boards are, and like what you think you're saying is not actually what's going on. Saying, well, the board was pretty much finished. Well, that's even more inexcusable that you lost Jason Moore because you already had the rest of your class figured out, right? He did not do a good job in year one. And I think people trying to spin the first year as some excuse for why he didn't do well. Well, why didn't that excuse matter for Chancey Stuckey? Why didn't that excuse matter for Mike Mickens his first year when he couldn't even go on the road and recruit his first year? So I don't buy that. And I think you're taking away from what Coach Washington is doing now. He didn't have success his first year. He knows that. And instead of making excuses or wallowing in self-pity or blaming other people, he's like, okay, I'm at Notre Dame. This is the job I got to do. He's made some corrections in how he goes about it. Look, I was talking to Sean Davis the other day when he was having a conversation with Justin Scott, and he was talking about Coach Washington and how the difference in how they interact now from where it was before. That's a very clear difference, and it's being impactful, right? So I think in life, to me, if I have a coach who's willing to say what I did wasn't good enough and I got to do better, that says a lot more about Al Washington as a man than just saying, well, the first year is just a mulligan because of whatever. And he was always doing this. It's just, no, you're taking away from the fact that this is a guy that looked in the mirror and said, this is the standard I've set for myself. This is the standard in Notre Dame, and I'm going to work my butt off to meet it. And he's starting to do it. So I think that's a much better story. It's also true than trying to retcon last year and making excuses for last year as if like, well, he's not doing anything different. It's just results are better because of whatever reason. I'm excited about the fact that he's made those changes. And that's what you need on this staff. Because we saw too many coaches in the past when things weren't going to go well, they would start making excuses. Well, the academics are too hard, or, this is just the kind of kid that we like, or whatever the case may be, or we have to shop down a different aisle, or he's not a Notre Dame kid. That was the end all be all, right? Well, he just wasn't a Notre Dame kid, meaning he wanted to win a championship. That is that what you refer to as not being a Notre Dame kid? Where Al Washington's not doing that. Hey, he didn't get off to a good start with Justin Scott in several ways. Some is made public and some has not been made public. But you know what he's done? He's regrouped, right? And now he's doing a great job on it. Elijah Rushing, for whatever reason, Notre Dame was trailing big there for a while. Early on, things were going well, fell behind. Now they're trending again. That's great. And he's also doing a great job with Kingston Viliamo-Asa, which, Ryan, you've talked about.
Who's not even a defensive lineman. Monumental part of that recruitment. Yeah. For people that don't know that one, I mean, because they're going to assume Kingston Viliamo-Asa, who's a star linebacker out of St. John Bosco in Bellflower, California, they're going to assume that's an Al Golden project, that's a Max Bola project, and then that's, maybe a Chad Bowden obviously is included in all of these guys, right? So I have to say Chad's name consistently. Like, if I'm talking about a recruit, Chad Bowden is a part of the recruitment.
Just assume it. Just assume it. Because that's his job. I mean, and he's very, very good at it. Exactly.
And Kingston has spoke high of Chad, of Al Golden, of even Max Bola recently, because he's been developing a relationship there. But one guy that you cannot talk about Kingston with Notre Dame and not mention, you can't forget about Al Washington in that recruitment. Because why? Al Washington was the linebacker coach at Ohio State, and he had a great relationship with Kingston before he came to Notre Dame. Let's also not forget this, Brian. One of the three top schools for Kingston is Ohio State. A lot of the reason for that is because Al Washington laid groundwork early on in that.
And he was still there,
right? That matters, right? So Al Washington has also been able to be a big help in that recruitment as well. So if Notre Dame also lands Kingston in this class, talking about the linebacker position, you also have to give a nice little pat on the back to Al Washington there, because he had a big assist in that one. There's no doubt.
I want to talk too, Ryan. It's like, you're doing better recruiting when a buddy of mine calls me yesterday and he's talking to me about Malachi Williams against Logan Thomas, and he's trying to say he's going to be disappointed if they get Logan Thomas because of how good Malachi Williams is. And I'm thinking, first of all, you're missing a boat a little bit on Logan Thomas. This is a good football player. But second of all, like, this is like first world problems. that are so different than where we were a month or two ago. When you and I were talking about, like, dude, they're going to end up taking this kid. I just know it. And I'm going to be very disappointed by it. Like, are we seriously arguing between Malachi Williams, who has one of the highest ceilings of any defensive end in the country, anywhere, any name, any ranking, whatever, Notre Dame or not, or Logan Thomas, who's like a top 100 prospect, who is a really twitchy, athletic kid who can do a lot of different things.
From Texas
If that's your argument of which one of those do you want, think about just how different that is from 2 weeks ago when we did a recruiting show, and we're trying to make people feel better about potentially getting the Smith twins, right? Who are good football players. This is not a shot on the Smith twins. They're good, solid football players, and that's what we said at the time, but they're not needle movers, right? Now, somebody just said in the chat, take them both. I would. For certain, I would take them both. But the point is, we're having a different conversation now than we were then. And a big part of it is not just who they might get, because it's really risky to bank all your energy on who they might get. My good feelings right now are who they already have in the class, because now it's about putting the finishing touches on it. And it allows you to narrow in your focus. So, I mean, when you do look at the finish, obviously it's Justin Scott inside. Now, Notre Dame is doing a good job of not putting all their eggs in the Justin Scott basket until he makes a decision. They're out today. If you're on the board, we put it out there where the coaches are today. They're going to see Sean Sevillano today, who's down in Tampa. There's some other interior type of guys that are on the board that they're still talking to, because this staff is doing a great job of, we're just not going to assume that we're not going to put all of our resources in here at a position where we have a need. Now, you can put all your resources into one particular fourth wide receiver, because if you don't get them, you're fine. You can put all your resources into Carter Nelson at tight end, because if you don't get him, you're fine, because you're not even sure if you have room for a second tight end yet. But at a defensive line, there's still needs remaining. But now that you have 3 of the 5 desired guys, there are some guys you can drop off the board. There are some guys that Notre Dame was looking at. I won't say their names because it'll come across as disrespectful, but you and I they're solid players. There's some upside there, but there's some risk involved, because they were far from finished products and didn't have the ceilings of a Bryce Young, who's also far from being a finished product. Well, now it's kind of like those guys are off the board now because they got high level talents. Bryce Young from an upside standpoint, Cole Mullins, who's a guy that I like right now, and also from an upside standpoint. So I feel much better about the defensive line now than I did before. It allows you to put more resources into Justin Scott and to Logan Thomas and Malachi Williams and Elijah Rushing, number 1. So I think that's a great place to start, Ryan. And there's a chance if they finish the way that they need to, and again, they still have to prove it. I think this D-line class is going to be a little bit more balanced than last year's. Last year's D-line class had every bit the upside of this year's D-line class. Even if they get Justin Scott and Elijah Rushing or Malachi or Logan Thomas, last year's D-line class upside-wise is every bit as good as this class upside-wise. The difference is there's some higher floors in this class than last year, in my opinion. When you look at Justin Scott, who is not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, but at 6'5", 310, you're going to get away with things that, 275-pound guy can't get away with as you develop. Cole Mullins has a higher floor, in my opinion. I think that Malachi's floor is a lot higher now based on what I see of his body than it was watching his junior film. Elijah Rushing, obviously, incredibly high floor. So, and it's a different style of player, which is important as well. When you look at the rest of it, though, Ryan, that's a position I feel really good about. The rest of the positions, honestly, are a little bit more, boy, this is going to be interesting to see how it finishes out, right? And I think when you look at running back, which is there's still a need there. When you look at offensive line, where there's still a need. When you look at linebacker, where there's still a need, and safety, where there's still a need. There's some areas where, boy, there's some question marks. But there's another position, Ryan, that I think that Notre Dame has kind of met their need numbers-wise, which is something that could allow them to finish strong, and that is corner.
Yep.
The fact that they already have Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs, Mike Mickens is going by to see Caleb Beasley today. That's another visit to see to his school to check in on Caleb Beasley. They can't actually talk to him face-to-face, I don't believe, at this point in time. But now, because you have those other two, you can put all your resources into the Aaron Scott, Caleb Beasley basket. And they love Aaron Scott. But from everything I've been told for months, the number one corner they've wanted from day one is Caleb Beasley. He's still talking to him. He's still listening. He's been on campus. You feel better about the chance to potentially flip him down the road. It's not going to be easy, but now that this is all Mike Mickens has to worry about, you start feeling a little bit better about this one. So that's another position where, from a an impact talent standpoint and a recruiting ranking standpoint, that could be one that could have a big impact as we move forward.
Well, and I feel like we don't talk about him enough, obviously, on this show, but Leonard Moore was such a just massive get for Notre Dame, man. And I feel like we didn't talk about it enough at the time, at least from a fan perspective. Because again, I remember when he was committed to Notre Dame, there were literally a bunch of people in the chat like, this is a 3-star kid. This is a 3-star kid. Notre Dame can do better. And now we're sitting here as he's rated as a top 150 kid by at least one service. And you look at that, you say, continuing the trend in Texas, getting a 6'2", 175-pound kid with length for days, good movement skills. Leonard Moore is a really good football player, and Carson Hobbs has upside as well to develop on the next level. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? So you have two corners in this class, and if you ended with a Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs, we know that the Notre Dame staff and Mike Mickens are very high on both of those players, and they would be ecstatic for having that. But that also gives you a baseline, which I think is the most important thing. It's a baseline of, I know who my guys are in this class. I have my needs met, like you said. Now Mike Mickens could say, you know what, guys? We know who our target is now, right? Like, we know who our two guys are that we really like. We know who the guy, though, that we have a really high opinion on in a Caleb Beasley. I am going to put my emphasis and my energy on that kid. Because if you get a player like a Caleb Beasley at some point to flip from the University of Tennessee, then Brian, I mean, this completely changes my opinion of this cornerback class. I like it already. But if they get a Caleb Beasley, now I say Caleb Beasley, Leonard Moore as your outside guys, and that might open possibilities, especially if Carson Hobbs takes a big jump as a senior. I can now go, hey, man, maybe he could be a safety. Maybe he could be a nickel. That could also help a couple different positions. So not only is the cornerback spot in a good spot in the sense that you hit your numbers and now you can focus on elite talent. If you do get that elite talent, I think that could bolster the entire secondary, not just the cornerback spot, because then you could talk about being flexible with a Carson Hobbs, with a Leonard Moore. They could play a couple different positions potentially on the next level. Heck, I mean, Caleb Beasley could even play safety if you felt like it. Not that the need would ever be a rise there, but I think that really gives you
so could Leonard Moore in
some
situations too, right? I think Leonard Moore could as well as a cover safety if the need is there. Absolutely, yep. Absolutely. Now let's talk about the positions where there is a little bit more concern about just exactly how they're going to finish. And we'll start on offense. Obviously, there's question marks on offense about what the numbers are going to look like. Do they take a fourth receiver? Do they decide to take a second tight end? I think those things are still being worked out. And the reason that there's not a rush to figure them out is because the kids that they like are not deciding anytime soon. Carter Nelson's not deciding anytime soon. And if he did, it wouldn't be for Notre Dame. And Jason Robinson, I don't believe, is deciding anytime soon. And so there's some time to kind of work all this stuff out. And then, of course, there's running back. Running back went from a luxury, in my opinion, to a need to take a second running back in the class, which is why you're seeing the board expand a little bit. Obviously, they offered Xavier Robinson, right?
Yes, correct.
It's a massive kid that they offered as a running back. When Coach Stuckey went out to see him from Oklahoma, somebody asked them, like, he's about to commit to Oklahoma. Why would you do this? Well, you just saw him tweet yesterday, I think, that, hey, I'm extending my recruitment. This is exactly why you get involved, because as more schools get involved before a kid decides, then you have a greater shot of getting him to push things back. And now you've got a shot to get in the game.
And now he's taking his official visits. Yeah,
correct. And so now Nathaniel Palmer is a guy that they went down and saw today, who's a really talented back in his own right. You still have Darian Dupree on the board. Anthony Carey and Keidron Young are coming up in June. Right now, Ryan, I'm confident they're going to land a second back. My question mark is, where on the board will that second back be?
Sure.
Because it's one thing to just land a guy for numbers. It's another thing to land a guy with impact talent. And we talked a little bit about this in a previous show at running back. I mean, right now, the goal right now is you've got to get one of Keidron Young or Anthony Carey. Obviously, Xavier Robinson's a guy that you just now got a relationship with. But to me, those two guys are the must get so far in this class, right? I mean, of guys that right now you have a realistic shot at. I don't view them as having a shot at Xavier Robinson right now, Ryan. I mean, I think you just got on that kid, right? Yep. And when he announced the officials he's taking, he didn't say he's taking one to Notre Dame. He said he's taking was like Oklahoma State. What was it, like TCU?
Something like that, yeah.
I think it was like the third one. So Notre Dame's not in the game yet, but at least they have a shot to get in the game. He's a talented back. mean, don't get it twisted. He's a very talented back at 225 pounds. I mean, that's a kid put up monster numbers last year. You know, he reminds me of at a high school. He reminds me of a bigger version of Quinshon Judkins when I watched Quinshon come out of high school, because Quinshon was a guy too that just wasn't fast. He just had great feet, great vision, and he just knew how to find holes. And that's how Xavier Robinson is as well, stylistically. Just a much bigger version of what Quinshon was. Because I had Quinshon as a 4-star coming out of high school, Ryan, because Notre Dame was actually recruiting him for a while. This was before you came on. So this is a position right now, Ryan, that is a little bit in flux. We're going to have to see who comes up for June. It's there. This isn't going to be settled anytime soon. It's going to be settled in June. Offensive line, though, Ryan, this is one right now that there's a lot of uncertainty because we just don't know where things stand with some of their top prospects. You know, Gerby Lambert, Styles Prescott, Grant Bricks. Now they will be out to see Grant Bricks today and tomorrow. See his high school today and tomorrow. They've been out to see Kevin Haywood. They've been out to see, I think Al Golden is not Al Golden, but Joe Rudolph, I think, is going to see Aiden Lynch at some point in time. They just went and checked out a North Carolina offensive lineman.
They just saw Aiden Lynch, I think, 2 days ago. Or went to his high school 2 days
and then
ago,
there's another North Carolina kid that they went and saw the day that they were looking at, that they went and saw Sullivan Absher. So I don't know who the next 2 offensive linemen are going to be. They really they need 2 now. Originally they were going to get away with taking 3, but the reason you need 2 now is because neither of the 2 guys you offered are tackles. And if Notre Dame is going to try to convince themselves that Anthony Knapp is a tackle, I'm concerned about the evaluating ability. He's got some tools. They like him more than I do. It's fine. It's all good. I see some tools there. I'm just not as high on him as Joe Rudolph is. But the one thing that we should all agree on is you can't, if you can play tackle, great. If it works out, great. But you can't just bank on that and only take 1 other tackle in this class when you need 2 tackles in this class. And I'd say the same thing about Peter Jones. So you've almost forced yourself to take a second tackle in this class. So now instead of just needing 1 guy, you now need 2. Yeah. And as of right now, Ryan, that's probably the one position where I'm the least confident in how they're going to finish. I think offensive line and safety are the 2 positions where I have the biggest question marks about exactly how they're going to finish. And that's just not where you want to be when you're the University of Notre Dame. You don't want to be having these big question marks on the offensive line.
Well, when Coach Easton was still here, I had 0 hesitation about the Notre Dame offensive line. I felt really good about them getting Gerby Lambert. I felt good about them getting Caleb Brewer in the class. And I'm like, that, add that into Peter Jones and maybe 1 more offensive line. Like, that's a good offensive line, man. I mean, Brian, if I told you ended with Caleb Brewer, Gerby Lambert, and Peter Jones, and then maybe 1 other guy, you'd be feeling great about where you were from an offensive line perspective, especially after the 5-man class you got in 2020, 2023. I mean, you feel good about that, not 8 to 9-man haul in a 2-year span. You feel really good, especially with obviously Coach Easton coaching it. I mean, you feel good. But here's the simple fact of it. You get a new coach. I have a good opinion of Joe Rudolph, the coach, right? The developer. I think he's going to do a really good job as a coach at Notre Dame. But the recruiting thing is something that I thought wasn't going to be an issue or an area of question, I guess is a better way to put it, right? But you come in and there's just a different evaluation than maybe what I would see as this offensive line. I think that's my main issue right now is like, I just don't see how you could see certain guys at tackle and not see Caleb Brewer as one, for instance. Like, that's just kind of my question mark, right? And the Gerby Lambert situation doesn't help anything because you just haven't – I don't know what that kid's doing, man. I really don't know, Brian. He's like, I like Massachusetts. I'm just going to stay here forever. Like, I'm not moving. It's so weird, man. He hasn't taken any visits unofficially, officially, just kind of sitting. He's originally supposed to be there for the blue and gold game, obviously, and ended up not making that trip. And I know people at the time were like, oh, man, that's really terrible for Notre Dame. And I'm just like, yeah, it is. But also, he hasn't been anywhere else, though. It's not like he's going somewhere else. It's not like he canceled Notre Dame trip to go down to Georgia
Penn State or something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, he's just not going anywhere. So I think that this situation could be flipped very quickly because if you end up getting Gerby Lambert and then 1 other guy, you feel good about the offensive line class at the end of the day, right? But there are a lot more question marks. I felt a lot better about Coach Easton closing on Gerby Lambert than what I do Joe Rudolph now, just because I don't know much about that relationship that they have together. I know Harry Hiestand had a good relationship with Gerby Lamberts. On the other side, I'm not sure what Joe Rudolph's relationship is with Gerby at this point. And then to the other part of it, I felt like for a while, you're like, okay, they like Styles Prescott. They like Caleb Brewer. They're going to get one of those two, to go with Gerby, and you feel good about that, right? But now the situation is Styles Prescott, who is a guy that Notre Dame has liked for a while, he's just kind of in limbo right now, right? Like for whatever reason, a decision has not been made.
He's still talking about taking more visits this summer, and it's interesting. I'll just leave it that way.
So the board outside of the 100% known is that Gerby Lambert has quickly become and was always for a while. He's a can't miss prospect in this class for Notre Dame.
Meaning can't miss. When we talk about can't miss, we're not saying he's not a can't miss. He's going to be a great player no matter what. We're saying you can't miss him in this class, meaning you can't not get him. He's a must get, is what we're saying. And the concerning thing for me is he didn't offer Gerby at Virginia Tech.
He didn't.
He didn't offer Caleb. He offered Caleb Brewer, but didn't really recruit him, which is kind of like, well, why? Why would you not recruit a kid like Gerby Lambert? So I don't know what the heck is going on. And I don't want to raise the red flag too much right now or sound the alarm too much, because a lot of us, we just don't know. We don't know what the communication's been like with him and Gerby Lambert. We just know that it's just not where it was. Because right now, if Harry Hiestand's still here, Caleb Brewer's committed to Notre Dame right now. Of that, I have zero doubt. I have zero doubt.
Yeah.
And maybe Gerby is. Now, at offensive line, that's going to happen sometimes when you lose an offensive line coach, because that more than any position is built on the trust and the relationship with that position coach, right? And so, maybe Coach Rudolph didn't feel that Gerby Lambert was a realistic option, and that's why he didn't recruit him. I don't know. Maybe he knew how tight Gerby was with Notre Dame and Penn State and said, hey, we're just not going to waste my time there. Maybe that's the case. It's not so much that he didn't evaluate him. So I want to be clear. I don't know why he didn't offer him at Virginia Tech, and I don't know why Gerby hasn't taken any visits now, but just the reality is it is concerning.
Yes.
Now, some positive things. I do think they're making moves with Grant Brix. Ryan, I have done some film study of him. You and I have talked about this. I like this junior film a lot more than the sophomore film.
Yep.
My only question with him for you would be, I see a lot of people listing him as a guard, and I get that off sophomore film, but off junior film, he looks like a tackle to me. Yep. In my opinion, and a physical player. So that's one where they're making some headway there with the kid from Iowa. Makes me feel a little bit better about where things are going than I did before. So he's a kid that I've definitely, my opinion of him has grown quite a bit since I've really dove into the junior film. But there's still a lot of work to be done there. There's no doubt. But at least you feel like, okay, that's a more viable option. I like him a whole lot better than I like Kevin Haywood as a player, for example.
Same.
So we'll see how they finish, but it's a concern. It is a concern as of right now.
And even if you get Grant Brix and one other not named Gerby Lambert, the question is still going to be do you have a left tackle in that class? Like that's a major thing for me, because I think Grant Brix could play right tackle in the next level. I think he could play pretty easily. I mean, he literally plays it now in high school, but can he play left tackle? I have questions there, right? I mean, right. Anthony Knapp, can he play left tackle? I have questions. Like those are the questions out there. So I think really, I mean, and we talk about, whether Joe Alt and Blake Fisher are going to be back for a fourth year and Emil Wagner continuing to develop and the next left tackle at Notre Dame. I think if I was a betting man, the guy that I would predict to maybe not be there out of Fisher and Alt is Alt, because he's the more accomplished player at this point, right? He might go in the top 10 in next year's class. I mean, that's just an assumption that I'm going to make. So the future of the left tackle position is one at Notre Dame where you have a lot of question marks. I have a lot of questions about the future of the left tackle position at Notre Dame. And I think that's why Gerby Lambert matters so much, because he's the one guy that's on the board that I say that's a left tackle on the next level. And again, like, will it all work out? Will he develop properly? Like, those questions are always there, but he has the frame, the size, the foot quickness, the length to look at and say, but he's going to play left tackle the next level. Is he going to be any good? We'll see, right? That's the troubling part with evaluating and projecting sometimes. But he has the makeup to play left tackle the next level. I'm just not sure if there's a ton of guys on Notre Dame's board that do easily translate to left tackle the next level.
Well, and with Bricks, it's because he doesn't pass block a ton. I mean, that's just the nature of the offense that they run. So
I think he's a little more athletic than Sullivan Absher, but very Sullivan Absher vibes on film as far as his strengths.
How he's used. Yeah,
Yes.
I do. I completely agree with the notion that he's more athletic than, especially his junior film is more athletic than, he's got more of tackle traits.
More explosive.
It's just more of but we just don't see him do it a whole lot. So how can I possibly project a guy to left tackle that I've seen 3 times pass set? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's just hard to do. Let's move on to linebacker, Ryan, because linebacker is an interesting position when we talk about the finish, because I feel better now than I did a month ago, but I still don't feel great about it. And there's some things that I think are happening that I'm kind of okay with. Yeah. Michigan is trending very well with Cole Sullivan right now. As you know, I've come around on Cole Sullivan as being a good, solid prospect, but I've always said I don't want him and Bodie Cahoon in the same class, and I like Bodie Cahoon better than Cole Sullivan. Yeah, Cole Sullivan, my concern was, where does he play at Notre Dame? I actually think he's a better fit in the Michigan defense than I do the Notre Dame defense. The problem is, if you're not going to get Cole Sullivan, I feel good about where they are with Bodie Cahoon. The question is, but who else are you going to get? And that's where we're at right now. Obviously, Notre Dame is in a good position with Kingston, Viliama, Asa, but so's Ohio State, right? So the close is going to be important. I really believe it's going to come down to one of those two guys based on what I've been told and what you've been able to gather from talking to him. And so you've got to close there. That is an absolute must get. This linebacker class will never come close to expectations, in my opinion, if you don't get Kingston in the class. There's just nobody else on the board right now that has the combination of floor and ceiling that he possesses. There's some ceiling guys in there, including the next guy I'm going to mention, but no one that has a combination of the two. Then there's other guys on the board. Chris Cole, right? There's Brian Huff. And then Al Washington this past week, since they've got on the road, has gone out to see a lot of other 2024 linebackers. There's a lot of kids they're going out to see. So clearly they are trying to expand the board, because it's not a given that they're going to be able to close on the guys that are on the board now. They have closed on none of them so far. You know, you've mentioned that Bodie Cahoon has talked about maybe moving his date up, but he hasn't done that yet, right? And so Kingston is a guy that they're doing a good job with, but there's still work to be done. So there's a lot of guys in this conversation, Ryan, that if they end up with Bodie Cahoon, Kingston, Viliama Asa, and one of Brian Huff or Chris Cole, I'm good. I'm really good with this linebacker class, especially if it's Chris Cole, because he's more of a rover. And so, but at the same time, I don't feel great that they're going to get even 2 of those 4, much less 3 of those 4 at this point in time, just because you can't count out Ohio State when it comes to Kingston. Depending on who you talk to, there's Ohio State people think they lead for Kingston. I personally think Notre Dame leads for Kingston, but either way, it's not great. And the close is going to be important. So linebacker recruiting right now is probably my second biggest question mark that I have. Actually, third biggest question mark. I think offensive line is still ahead of it, and then safety is still my number one question mark.
I think linebacker is very boomer bust in 2024 to a degree, right? Because you're like, I mean, if you get to your point, Brian, if you get a Kingston Viliamoasa and you get a Bodie Cahoon, and then you get one of those other couple linebackers we talked about, I mean, I think the dream scenario is that you get Chris Cole as that third linebacker, right? So that, because they would all, I think, fit together very well. I mean, that's a really good class, man. I mean, we're talking about Kingston, who's a top 100 football player in the 2024 class. You talk about Chris Cole, who I would argue might have 5-star upside. Like, he's close, man. If not, like, he might be 4.5.
It's not an argument, Ryan. Yeah. It's not an argument. I mean, at least it's not going to be with me. It's, okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
And especially seeing that kid in person, man, because I'm like, that kid is athletic on film. And then I saw his frame in person. I'm like, that kid's going to be 6'3", 230. And he's probably still going to be able to play rover at that size because he's just so long everywhere, man. So you look at him with that upside he has, and then the fact that Bodie Cahoon is just a good player. Like, I mean, just flat out, if that's your third linebacker in the class, you're in a good spot there, man. Like, you're doing pretty well. But the fact of the matter is that Chris Cole is taking an official in June. That's great, right? You've made headway there. But it's not a foregone conclusion that Chris Cole ends up in this class if you're Notre Dame.
By any stretch. Not even
By
close
any
to being a
stretch.
foregone conclusion. Yeah.
And then you got Kingston, who's obviously visiting in June for an official visit. He's taking USC, Ohio State, Notre Dame. That's his top three. We believe that that is a Notre Dame, Ohio State battle when all is said and done. Because I just feel like he's the type of kid that's going to leave home. Like, I just don't see him playing in California, but we shall see. So in theory, this could be a really good class.
And there's some other guys on the board too. Aaron Childs, somebody's brought up, who's a stud. But there's, I mean, he's scheduled a visit, but I don't even know if he's going to still be uncommitted by the time we get to invade, and
never know.
They're so far behind on that kid right now that it's, and it's telling that so far they've been on the road now day 5 and they've yet to go out and see Aaron Childs. I think that tells you everything you need to know about where Notre Dame thinks they are with him. I love him, but they're just,
he's a great player.
There's just never been much interest from him. And he set up a visit to Notre Dame, but it's like, okay, we'll see. We'll see if he actually makes it. I'm at the point now where it's like if he shows up on campus, I'm going to be surprised. I'll be very pleasantly and happily surprised.
Sure.
But I'll be surprised. That's why we're not focusing on like Aaron Childs. Like Sammy Brown's another one. They're not getting Sammy Brown. We're trying to be realistic with guys that are on the board right now. We could have talked about Brandon Baker on the offensive line. They offered him. I guess anything had happened, but they're not going to get Brandon Baker. Right? We're trying to give you realistic options right now, and Sammy Brown's not a realistic option at linebacker. Aaron Childs right now is not a realistic option at linebacker, and that's what makes it a little bit challenging. Is that you've got to? This is one of those positions where you've got to hit the inside straight, and that's hard to do in recruiting. And I'll say this, Ryan, there's a chance that if you land the right guys, you're landing a class whose upside is every bit as good as the last two.
Yeah.
Because I'll stack Chris Cole's upside up against anybody that Notre Dame's landed in recent years.
Yeah.
Now, his floor's on the lower side compared to other guys, but I'll put his upside up against anybody. And, Bodie and Kingston both have high upsides. I don't know. I don't have Kingston as a 5-star upside guy right now, Ryan. I was like 4.5. I think he's like a top 50 kind of guy upside wise. But it's very high. And Bodie has a very high upside as well. But you've got to hit the inside straight. I mean, we're talking about 4 guys right now that we feel they have a legitimate shot at. Is that fair? Well, 5, because Cole Sullivan's still in there right now. I mean, they could turn things around. They thought they were going to lose Michael Gilbert a week before they got him as well.
Sure.
But Cole Sullivan, Kingston, Bodie, Chris Cole, Brian Huff right now, to me, are the 5 most realistic options.
Yeah.
That means you got to bat over 500, and that's tough. I mean, that's tough. That's going to be a tough close.
Because if you don't get Kingston and you don't get Chris Cole, for instance, right? I still think that they're going to have a tremendous chance at Bodie Cahoon no matter what in that scenario. But then you're going to start to talk about if you can't make headway with a Brian Huff moving forward and you can't get back in the right spot with Cole Sullivan, then you might need to expand the board again if that's a need that you need to hit, which is they've already expanded the board a lot. It's like it's been. I mean, what is there, like 28 linebackers that have been offered by Notre Dame this cycle? Like it's a large number. So yeah, man, it's one of those situations where we could be looking at a really good class, or we could be looking at an underwhelming class. Like I just don't think there's too much in between on this one. Like they're either going to hit that inside straight, or they're going to strike out a couple times, and it's going to get a little hairy. That's just kind of how I see it.
Yeah, that's the
boomer
feeling
bust.
Right now.
Boomer bust is the linebacker spot, I believe, in 2024.
Yep, that's where we're at. Let's talk safety recruiting, Ryan. This to me is probably the biggest question mark that I have. It's either this or offensive line to me. And obviously, getting Kennedy Urlacher was a great start, but you need at least 2 more. And I think there's an argument to be made that possibly 4, as long as one of those guys is a potential maybe move somewhere else kind of guy. But 3 is the number I'm good with. If they can flip Caleb Beasley, I'm good with 3.
Yeah,
good with 3 safeties. If you can't flip Caleb Beasley or get Aaron Scott, and I have zero confidence in them getting Aaron Scott right now. I mean, I think he likes Notre Dame a lot. I just think he's always liked Michigan and Ohio State a lot more. That's just the reality of it. Looking at it, Ryan, outside of you've got Kennedy Urlacher in the class. There's other guys on the board: Davis Andrews, DeJuan Lane, Paul Menke, Marquise Gallegos, who has faded a little bit. You've got Oliver Miles, And did I mention DeJuan Lane yet?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then they're going out tomorrow to see Jalen McClain. Now, my hope is that they can somehow remind him of why he liked Notre Dame so much at the beginning and get him off of the NIL track, the locked in focus on the NIL track. If they can get some movement when they go see him tomorrow, that would be great. Obviously, let the coaches know and just get on the phone and talk to him and just remind him of the opportunities that Notre Dame presents him. Yes, we're not going to give you an upfront guaranteed amount of money, but trust me, look what our last star safety made, right? That kind of thing. Made $1 million in a year. So I think when you look at that, Ryan, that's a big one too. But right now I look at it and I'm like, I could see them getting any of those guys. I could see them landing all those guys, meaning each individual one, not all of them together. But I could also see him missing on all those guys as well. And with Davis Andrews talking to you about possibly pushing this thing back a little bit, that was the one that concerned me. Like, like you're having even trouble closing on Davis Andrews. You start feeling a little bit shaky about it. So then you get into like Paul Menke. I like him a ton. Oliver Miles is a guy that the staff's very high on. He's very athletic. I just don't necessarily see a great football player yet. I see more Ramon Henderson than I see Xavier Watts early on. Just fine. There's a lot of guys on the board, but, I'm not sure who they're going to close on at this point in time. And that's the concerning one for me. And the other part of the concern is the reason I'm a little bit more confident in O-line and linebackers because, number one, track record. Joe Rudolph has a track record. So part of me, deep down, I'm like, I think they're going to be okay, even though I'm very concerned because of his track record. And as these kids go in the process and they get to know him better, the pedigree is going to speak for itself, right? And linebacker, it's like, once Marcus Freeman starts really ramping things up and getting involved, and as these kids get to know Max Bullough a little bit better, that's going to help as well. So there's a track record involved. Safety, with all due respect, Chris O'Leary's track record is not good as far as closing. It's not good at all. I mean, especially with top-level prospects. I mean, he couldn't close on Xavier Nwankpa. He couldn't close on Peyton Bowen. And I don't fault him for that, but it just is what it is. They didn't get Peyton Bowen. I mean, I'm not saying, Chris O'Leary screwed it up. I don't know what he could have done different, but the fact is he didn't get him, right? And they got a Don Shula and Ben Mintz who are good football players, but there's also a lot of high-level safeties last year that they did miss on. And so now you're in a situation where I like Kennedy Urlacher. He's a good football player, but you've got to build on top of Kennedy Urlacher, if you know what I'm saying. Yes. And I don't know. I don't feel great about where they are in that regard with closing. Now, the good news is there's a lot of really good safeties they're involved in, right? If they get two of Davis Andrews, DeJuan Lane, Paul Menke, trying to think I'm just forgetting some of the safeties on the board, Jalen McClain,
Marquise Gallegos.
To me, Gallegos is more on the Kennedy Urlacher level. Once you got Kennedy, for me, Gallegos would be off the board for me. Like, that's the floor. Kennedy and Gallegos were the floor. Now that you got Kennedy, who I think is a better player than Marquise Gallegos, it's got to be better than him. Or a guy like Oliver Miles, who is not a better safety than him right now because he's more of an athlete, but at least has a really high ceiling. He's got really good size. He's over 6'1". He's got tremendous track times, It's got to be a guy like that, with a much higher ceiling, or a guy that's just a much better player, DeJuan Lane and all those guys. If they get two of the group that I just mentioned of Lane, Andrews, Menke, Miles, and Jalen McClain, which is where I think the board is. If I'm forgetting someone, Ryan, let me know. But if you can get one of those guys, then two of those guys, then they're good. It's just right now, if I were to tell you who of that group do you think they're going to get, you'd let me guess. You'd say maybe Davis Andrews, and after that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I'm like just working through my head a little bit. I mean, for a while, I liked Notre Dame's chances with Jalen McClain, but we've talked about that, obviously, that they got a little bit of that fade. Hopefully, Notre Dame can turn that one around, to your point. DeJuan Lane is a player that's interesting because there just didn't seem to be any traction early on, but obviously they got him to come on a visit, and things seem to be going in a better direction there. But ultimately, man, this is a troubling area on this team. One, because you need numbers. Right. You're in a bad spot. Yeah. I mean, they need to go into the transfer portal this offseason just because the numbers are not great at the safety position. And then also, you've missed out over the last couple of years on a couple high impact safeties on the back end from a recruiting perspective. Like, you need not only numbers, you need high impact talents. You need it. So adding those both together with the fact that the safety board is a little bit all over the place right now, that gives you some hesitation or some question marks that are going to follow, obviously. Again, this is another one where you could feel a lot better about it. If just one or two things go your way, you can feel a lot better about it. Or the board might have to expand again.
And it's already starting to, Ryan. I mean, they offered a kid today from Louisiana. Now, I don't know where they are. I also know that they're still recruiting Jason Mitchell. But I mean,
there's nothing there though.
I put him in the. He's talked about visiting for an official this summer.
Yeah,
but the reality is, I put him in the same category as Aaron Childs. Okay, sure, I'll believe it when I see it. Number one, but number two, just because you're coming on official, like Richard Young came on an official.
Yes.
Like, what does that mean?
Wasn't that the most random official of all time? By the way, it was Richard Young.
It was. But the reality is they've got to close strong. Now, again, there's good guys on the board. I'm not worried about the board. I like the board, Ryan. It's just I don't have a lot of faith right now that they're going to be able to close on that board, because there's two problems working against you. Number one is Chris O'Leary, for whatever reason, just hasn't been able to close on those guys. Let's just be honest. He hasn't. And I would argue that if you look at the two guys they got last year, other coaches played as big of a role as those guys getting their name as Chris O'Leary did. Not that he doesn't deserve any credit. He does deserve credit, but you got to know Don Schuler very well. Marcus Freeman not being the head, Marcus Freeman's not the head coach, I don't know that Don Schuler's at Notre Dame, especially once the Georgias and the Bamas and those schools. Like, when he committed to Notre Dame, he wasn't planning on committing. It was just a combination of Notre Dame being Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman being Marcus Freeman, right? Chad Bowden had a huge role in getting Ben Minich to Notre Dame. Now, Coach O'Leary played a role as well. I'm not trying to take it away from him, but he hasn't shown himself to be that dynamic recruiter that can go out and do that. Very good position coach, in my opinion, but just hasn't been able to sell himself the way that you'd think a guy that developed a first-round NFL draft pick and has, got the production he got out of the roster they had last year, has turned a converted corner and a converting wide receiver into a safety tandem that went out and helped you beat South Carolina, just hasn't tracked. Hopefully this is the year that happens. And if, give me Davis Andrews and DeJuan Lane or Davis Andrews and Paul Menke or DeJuan Lane and Paul. I mean, there's a lot of combinations that can make this really work, Ryan. And it's just going to be a very important thing. Get that done. Very important. And it's probably the position I'm the least confident in right now, just based on track record. But I do like the fact that it's a good board right now.
Yep.
It is a really good board right now. And you're right, though. They may need to expand it as they try to find it, which would get, if you start seeing them throwing out a bunch of safety offers, get worried. Yeah. Because it means they don't think they're going to close on the guys that they have. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, obviously, because, again, this is one of those not quite as boom or bust as linebacker, because I actually think the linebacker position, if they close on the couple of guys we talked about, I think it could have a little bit of a higher ceiling than what the safety position is going to end up being if they hit like a little bit of a home run there. But I still think that there's not a lot of middle ground for this safety class, in my opinion. Like, this is either going to be a good to very good safety class, or it's going to be an underwhelming safety class where you're going to have to go to some plan B or plan C options. Like, that's kind of where you are with the safety position. And to your points, Brian, there have been some questionable recruiting from Al Washington that we've talked about in the past. There's been some questionable recruiting from Al Golden in the past. But you know what both those guys have done before in their careers at some point? They have recruited at a nice level. They have at times, right? Chris O'Leary, you have no proof that he can recruit at a high level. You have zero proof about it. I think that there's a lot of proof that he can coach football well, which is great. But we know that college football is not just a on-field experience, right? Like, that's the NFL, guys. The NFL, that's about being able to coach and put guys in proper position and be able to win that way. But college football is predicated on recruiting at a high level as well. And there is some question marks, obviously, at the safety position. But the other positions that we have question marks on, you mentioned Joe Rudolph as well, right? Joe Rudolph has recruited very well at times in his career. Al Golden has recruited very well at times in his career. Al Washington has recruited very well at times in his career before Notre Dame. Chris O'Leary, there's just not a track record, and there's not something to give you optimism that he can get it turned around. It's question marks right now. And you can't lie to yourself about that. There is question marks. Doesn't mean that he can't prove you wrong, right? It doesn't mean that he can't be a really good recruiter, but until he does, there are question marks, which is okay. Yeah. It's just that's the facts, though. It is a fact right now.
If he can land a really good class this year, I think it could be the start of something. That's the big thing with Chris O'Leary, is because if he can start getting higher level players, his ability to coach is going to start shining through even more. And that's the thing, is like, look, if he can, develop a Don and Ben Minich, and if Xavier has the jump that we hope that he can have, and then you can, if you're able, I don't care if Chris O'Leary gets zero credit for bringing in the safety class this year. I don't care. Get him good safeties, because I think the guy can coach. That's the thing. I think the guy can flat out coach. I just don't know if he can bring in the best, the top players. Like with Mike Mickens, Mike Mickens can flat out coach, but he's also proven he can flat out recruit as well.
Yes.
Chancey Stuckey has proven he can recruit at a high level. His coaching has been good so far. We need to see it take another jump next year. So, but it's the dual threat aspect of it that is needed. Dylan McCullough has shown he can do both at a very high level.
Yep.
And the guys that aren't doing either or both of those need to step up. Chris O'Leary, I think, has done a very good job coaching, but talent acquisition is just as important as coaching, in my opinion, especially the skill position. And I don't care about top 100 guys. Give me talented guys wherever they're ranked. And I'll feel good about it, because I do feel like he's a coach that can maximize the ability of his players. And that's going to be an interesting thing. Ryan, I want to finish up with this. Let's talk about one potential surprise recruit. Who could you see someone right now that we just don't think Notre Dame's in a great shot at right now on both sides of the ball that we could see Notre Dame getting when it's all said and done? So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. So a guy that, again, not a guy that they're second for right now that we think they're going to get, but maybe someone that we're not talking a lot about, or that people aren't talking enough about, or a guy that is not someone that people are trending to Notre Dame, those type of things on each side of the ball. I have mine, Ryan, on offense. I'll let you start off and give me yours, just in case. So I don't want to steal your thunder in case we have the same guy.
I think it's got to be one of the running backs. Like, it has to be on offense, because the way I look at it right now, Brian, is if you do push the wide receivers to 4, I feel pretty good about Notre Dame getting Jason Robinson. And we've talked about that a ton. Tight end wise, it remains to be seen if you are going to push that number to 2 or not. So that is a little bit of a question mark. Offensive line wise, for me, like, it wouldn't shock me if they got Gerby Lambert. It wouldn't shock me at all. Like, it would just be like, right, okay, that's cool. They did pull that one off. For me, it's got to be one of the running backs, because yes, things appear to be in a good spot with Keidron Young out of Texas, but I mean, he's never been on campus yet. He would only have taken an official to Notre Dame in June, obviously, and you're still getting a high quality back out of Lufkin, Texas. Like, that matters, right? So yeah. I think whether it is Keidron Young or Anthony Carey, I think that would be monumental for Notre Dame. And I think that would be a slight surprise for me, because I just look at it and I say, we're talking about a running back out of the state of Texas, and we're talking about a running back out of the state of Florida. Like, there's a lot of competition for those two players. So if Notre Dame gets either one of those running backs, I think that would be a little bit of an upset, and I think that would be monumental for them. And I just offensively, I feel like the class is like, outside of maybe one more wide receiver and an offensive lineman on top of the running backs, a couple offensive linemen, your offensive class is almost done, man. Like, you're almost ready to kind of call this thing quits. So right. I really think it's one of the two running backs, man. Take Keidron Young or Anthony Carey, either one. I think that would be a bit of an upset for Notre Dame.
Keidron Young was my pick, just because of the Texas aspect. I mean, there's a lot of good schools in Texas and want that kid. That would be mine. And we don't talk about it a ton. Defensively, Ryan, who is your guy?
I mean, Caleb Beasley would be the guy for me. I mean, we talk about him, so this one isn't like a perfect fit into this category, but I don't think we talk about it enough. The fact that there are a lot of tea leaves around this one, Brian, where you're like, although he is committed to the University of Tennessee, an in-state school, a school that he grew up obviously with a deep knowledge of and a fan of, right? And the fact that they have some momentum as far as the what they're developing under Josh Heupel over there. Keeps talking to Notre Dame, man. Goes on a visit to Notre Dame. I think that there is legitimate smoke there. And although it's not one where I would necessarily predict it today to flip at some point, I still think that there's a legitimate chance that you get a Caleb Beasley down the road. So he would 100% be mine on defense. Because again, I just feel like, I could have went Elijah Rushing. He was the other way I was going to go, because that one is, yes, you're in the game, but it's not necessarily you're in a great position for. But everyone's talking about Elijah Rushing right now. I think that not enough people are talking about the fact that Caleb Beasley still talks to Notre Dame and talks to him a lot. Yeah. And that says a lot. I think it says a lot for just how much respect he has for Marcus Freeman and the staff.
Yeah, that's the Caleb Beasley one for me, obviously, is because I talk about him so much. I just don't view him as a surprise. That just for me personally, I think you make good arguments. I think for me, I'm trying to think of a guy that would be a surprise. I mean, obviously we talked about Chris Cole. I don't think that'd be a surprise. I think Elijah Rushing would be a surprise if he did it right now. But I think by the time we get to the visit, we'll know if Notre Dame's a player, and it won't.
You know who would be my second on the list? Yeah. A different guy is Malachi Williams. Would be, yes. I think, still a surprise.
That's
right?
where I was going to kind of go. Yeah.
Yeah. Go
with Elijah Ryan, it was he had Notre Dame in very high regard early. It's now getting back to that. With Malachi, it was like he just doesn't seem to be all that excited about Notre Dame. Right. And Penn State seems to be the team that's out in front, and this doesn't seem to be a lot of interest there. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, you're actually in the game now. I'd be much more surprised if they got him than I would Logan Thomas or even Elijah Rushing.
Same,
honestly. The other one to me is – go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say for Malachi, too, it's because he's a Pennsylvania guy. He's from Drexel Hill, which is just outside of Philadelphia. It's like a suburb of Philadelphia. And for people that aren't around this area a ton – this is very pro Penn State country where I live, right? Like very pro Penn State country. And I'll say this. I think that Notre Dame has a chance with Malachi because obviously he's planning an official visit now to Notre Dame after going on an unofficial. But this is one where the big reason that he even went to Notre Dame in the first place is because his coach and his mom. Like those are the big reasons, right? Like this wasn't necessarily a Malachi decision to go see Notre Dame. He was urged to go see Notre Dame because he is a good fit with the program. So
which is what happened with Micah Gilbert, if we're being honest. And he ended up in the class. That happened with Kenny Minchie. Kenny Minchie explained, sat down with him when he did an interview at Notre Dame, and he explained, like, I didn't really know a lot about Notre Dame or really know a lot about the tradition. My parents were the ones that encouraged me to look at Notre Dame. And then, of course, once he did, fell in love, and he ended up at Notre Dame. But you see that a lot more now because, again, most of these kids are 16 to 18 years old.
Yep.
And Notre Dame has – I mean, think about it. Charlie Weiss's first year in Notre Dame in 2005, kids that were born in 2005 are now like 17, 18 years old.
Right.
They were born in Charlie Weiss's first year. The kids that are being recruited now weren't even alive when Ty Willingham was the coach, much less Lou Holtz. Right. And so that tradition is still alive more in the parents than it is the kids. And then, of course, the kids learn to respect the tradition and all that kind of stuff. And Notre Dame's recent success has been good. And so, to me, my surprise, however, is going to be a safety. It's either going to be DeJuan Lane or a guy that's not really a guy we think is going to be. And I don't know who it is, but there's going to be I'm predicting that some safety that we're thinking Notre Dame doesn't have a shot at right now, whether it's DeJuan Lane, Jalen McClain, or some, Jason Mitchell, like right now would floor me if Jason Mitchell even showed up this summer, much less picked Notre Dame. There's going to be some safety like that we don't know about that's going to end up eventually jumping on board. That's my surprise pick. That could also be a little bit more wishful thinking, Ryan, than it is necessarily a surprise prediction. But I just have this feeling that that's going to happen as we move forward. And I think a lot of it's going to be because those guys are going to see what's being built in front of them.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like, okay, I don't know a lot about this guy O'Leary, but he seems to have done a pretty good job here. Kyle Hamilton speaks highly of him. But, man, look at that D-line they're putting together. Man, look at that linebacking class they're putting together. Boy, they got some pretty good corners that they've recruited. You know what I mean? I think that's going to be the thing that's ultimately going to allow Notre Dame to close on somebody big at safety. That's going to surprise us all.
Jason Mitchell is a really interesting one, Brian, if that ended up being that way, because one thing is that he was a he played at Sarah, but he transferred to St. John Bosco for his senior year. So if they get Kingston Villamoasa, it's like, talk to your boy, man. Talk to
You
your
see what I'm
boy.
saying? So like that's what I'm
Yeah,
like, dude,
yeah.
they got Justin Scott, they got Kingston, they got, they got Logan Thomas or Elijah Rushing or Malachi Williams or and all of a sudden it's like, hey, hold on a second now.
Yeah.
Let's look at this thing. If they flip Caleb Beasley or something like that, I think the momentum that would come there. So I think it'll be something like that. That'll be the thing that kicks them over. And I really feel, and I could be completely wrong about this. But when I look at this group, Ryan, I look at it like this. I believe that once Chris O'Leary kicks the door down from a recruiting standpoint, it's going to be a flood. I really do. Once because I think it's going to signify a couple things. Number one is he's finding his recruiting group. Because what you have to understand about Chris O'Leary, Chancey Stuckey didn't have a very long track record of recruiting, but Chancey Stuckey was a big recruit, and Chancey Stuckey played the NFL for a number of years. Yep. He has big time experience. Chris O'Leary came to Notre Dame from a Division II school at Florida Tech. He played at Indiana State. This big time football is new to him in a lot of ways, and he's still learning how to communicate with these guys that, Marcus Freeman played at Notre Dame. Played at Ohio State, right? Al Washington played at Boston College. Al Golden played at Penn State. Chancey Stuckey played at Clemson.
Yeah.
Geno is the all-time passing leader at Cincinnati, right? Dylan McCullough played at, where did he play at?
Dylan played at,
was it Miami of Ohio?
Miami, Ohio. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But he was a D1 guy. He's won a Super Bowl. He's coached at USC. He's coached in the Big Ten. The point being, all these guys had some level of a track record. Mike Mickens is the closest thing you could get to it, but even because he was at Cincinnati and Bowling Green, but again, he played at Cincinnati under Brian Kelly. Yeah. He played on some really good teams there.
And O'Leary's still really young, too,
yes.
man. Like, he's a very young
guy.
Right.
I think he's still learning, right? Yeah. So people say, why do you give him a pass? Because Al Washington's 35, 36 years old, who's been coaching a decade. Chris O'Leary's like 27, who was a GA 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm going to give him a little bit more of a pass, but I feel like if he does kick the door down, it means a couple things. Number one is the kids are finally buying into the product on the field. They're saying like, wow, that guy did a good job getting that guy able to play. Like, what can he do with me? But it also would mean that he has found his way. People have asked, how do you be a good recruiter? It's just about, can you relate and communicate? And a lot of young coaches think relating means I'll just be honest, when I'm a white coach talking to a black kid, I got to change how I talk. I got to pretend like I like music that he likes to somehow like demean myself because that's the only way. No, what those kids like is genuineness, right? Some of the best recruiters I know don't like rap music, but they're genuine, they're real, they're open, they care about these kids, right? And it's about, I'm not saying Chris O'Leary does that, I'm using an example. It's about, how do I relate to these kids? How do I communicate to them? How do I build that connection with them that can get them to trust me when I don't have the track record that Kirby Smart's staff has at developing players, that Alabama staff has at developing players, that Ohio State staff has at developing players? How do I get that? And once he figures that out and he gets comfortable in that way, and then the results start showing on the field, I think that's when you see the floodgates open. When he finds his happy place as a recruiter, then I think he's going to take off, because I think he's a very good position coach. I mean, there's a reason Marcus Freeman wanted this guy, because the backstory there is he was the, I think, analyst or GA that worked with the Rovers in Marcus Freeman's, I think the year before Marcus Freeman was hired, because Chris O'Leary coached safeties in 2021, correct, as well?
Yeah.
And it was like he did a really good job with Jeremiah Usakora-Moa. There was this great reputation, and the players loved him. And so that's why Marcus Freeman chose him over some other more experienced safety candidates when it came down to who's going to be the new safety coach under Marcus Freeman. And then Coach Freeman kept him in his first year as the head coach. There's a reason. He sees a lot of potential there. But eventually that potential's got to turn into results in both areas. But I really feel like once he figures it out and gets comfortable in kind of his own skin as a recruiter, I think the results are going to start being really impressive, because I think the guy can flat out coach. And and the kids love him. So like he can relate to players that he knows that are there. I think he's a very honest, genuine guy. It's more of, how do I strike this up from some kid I don't know and build it that way. That's a different animal, man. And I'm telling you, that takes some time to get to know, especially like I did it at the Division III and 1AA level. That's a whole different animal than trying to do it to some kid that just got off the phone with Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. Believe me, right? And that's new to him because he came from Florida Tech, right? So that's where I'm coming from. I think the light's going to go on. He's just going to connect with some kid, and then that kid's going to surprise everybody and come. And then I just think the floodgates open at that point in time.
Let's hope.
That's where I'm seeing.
Yep.
All right, Ryan. So let's dive into some team topics real quick. We're going to we're going to talk first about the Notre Dame offense, and then defense, about the spring breakouts that we saw. The guys that either had legit breakouts or guys that showed flashes that we think are most important to this football team in the fall, meaning them carrying over this breakout into the fall is the most important. So we'll talk about 2 or 3 guys on both sides of the ball. Let's kick things off on offensive side of the ball. Ryan, who's the guy that you thought had a breakout or showed flashes of that player this spring that he has to carry in the fall if this team is going to reach its potential?
It's a player that Notre Dame fans know well at this point, but I think it's Chris Tyree for me. I really think it is, because the reason that I put him in this category is because he's playing a position that is new to him, right? He's playing a slot position where I think that you got a little bit of a taste as far as this spring of what's going to be the role for Chris Tyree. Like, I expect him to run routes as a receiver. I expect him to do some RPO game out of the slot. But I also expect them to be able to use him as a guy that they can give an end around to, that they can run a jet sweep to at times, that they can motion into the backfield. And I really think about this offense, Brian. For me, it's like, I think that one part that Notre Dame needs more of moving forward, especially with the fact that we know that under Jared Parker, this is going to be a little bit more of an RPO heavy team. I think you need guys that can make some things happen after the catch, guys that can make things happen in space.
Because, Ryan, you can run RPOs all you want, but if teams aren't afraid of it, well, let them catch a 6-yard hitch. I'd rather them catch a 6-yard hitch than freaking hand the ball off to Audric Estime or Jadarian Price or Jeremiah Love. Exactly right. You need guys that can scare you in the RPO game.
Yeah. Because there's towers everywhere, right? And there's physicality everywhere. Like, I think that Jaden Thomas, for instance, catching a ball in space, he could break a tackle or two, and he can get some extra tough yardage. But there aren't many guys in this offense, running backs, wide receivers included, that if you miss him in space, just one missed tackle, the guy's going to take a 10-yard RPO, RPO arrow route, for instance, and take it for 70. Like, there's just not many guys.
Glances too, Ryan. I mean, glances too. If you miss him by half a step on a glance route, which for fans at home looks a lot like a slant, there's a lot of sometimes it's going to look exact. Sometimes it is a slant. Sometimes it gets extended. Sometimes it's more of an in. It's sort of like an option route for a slant, essentially, is what a glance route is to me. That's the best way to explain it to people.
Yeah.
But it's going to look like a slant a lot of times. But if you miss him by half a step,
he gone, man. He gone. I mean, and I think there's a couple running backs that, if healthy and used this fall, could be that guy. Like, you could see Jadarian Price create a big play that way. Jeremiah Love.
Right. But we didn't see him in the spring.
Exactly. But as a guy that is legitimately going to line up at wide receiver a lot in 2023, you just don't have a ton of that on this roster right now. Guys that can really make you miss, guys that can really turn a small gain into a big play. So I look at Chris Tyree, the added dimension that he has in what should be an RPO heavy system. I really think that he could be a dynamic space player and a guy that creates a lot of explosive plays in a new role in this offense in 2023.
I think Jabron Payne is a guy that comes to mind when I think of this conversation, because him emerging makes you feel better about the talent at running back. Like, if this is supposedly your lowest guy on the totem pole and he looks like that all spring, not just the blue gold game, we had that nice run, but we saw him in the two practices we were at look exactly like what he looked at the spring game, even better at times. So you start to feel better there. But there's 2 guys I'm going to go with, Ryan, is number 1 is Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah.
He had a spring breakout to the point where the perception is he's going to be their best receiver. I think right now I'm still more confident in Jaden Thomas being their best receiver, because I on a consistent basis, you know what Jaden can bring to the table. But the good part of Tobias that we saw this spring, that people talk about that we're at practice, we've got to see that a lot in the fall. If Tobias can take the breakout and build on it heading into the fall, he completely changes the dynamic of the offense, right? I mean, completely changes the dynamic of the offense. So I think he's a very important one. And then another one that I have, well, let me finish with Tobias a little bit and why it's important. I don't think Tobias has to be their leading receiver from a catches standpoint. In fact, I could see a scenario where Jaden Thomas is the team's leading receiver from a catches standpoint. But if Tobias leads this team in receiving yards, and you could make the same case for Deion Colsey, but if Tobias could do that from a yard standpoint, I think that completely changes how you defend Notre Dame because he's the field receiver. Let me explain why. He's the field receiver. A lot of the production from the field receiver is going to be in two areas. Number one, in space. It's what you just mentioned, Ryan. A guy that can catch an under route, a guy that can catch an over route, a guy that can catch a crosser, a guy that can take a hitch, make one guy miss, and then go because you're going to be in space. And the other one is the way that they use that position. It's about, can he take the top off of a defense? Can he vertically stretch a defense? Now, we saw him do it against Stanford, but can he do it against the better teams in the schedule?
Right.
If he is able to do that, Ryan, and he's a 50 catch, 850, 900 yard guy, let's just say, and that'd be a heck of a sophomore season. If he is that, you have to defend Notre Dame completely differently, which makes it harder to then handle the tight ends and Jaden Thomas in the slot. It makes it harder to roll coverage into the boundary to deal with Deion Colsey, and it definitely makes it harder to put enough numbers in the box to defend the run game. So I think Tobias Merriweather stepping up would have a huge impact on the Notre Dame offense if he can take her in the fall. Because we've seen spring breakouts not actually break out in the fall. And that's the premise of this. It's like, yeah, it's great that you broke out in the spring, but it didn't continue in the fall, so it doesn't matter because that's all that really matters. I think you could make a case for Deion Colsey. I think you could make a case for a lot of receivers. And I think the one you made about Chris Tyree is excellent. There's another one. And I saw somebody, I was hoping nobody would mention it, but we saw somebody in the chat mention it. The other one's Rocco Spindler. I wouldn't say that he had necessarily a true breakout per se. I heard some good things about how he finished the spring, and I thought he played pretty well in the blue gold game. I did. I don't know if you had a chance to go back and watch it, Ryan, after you got home, but I was impressed with what I saw from Rocco. I really was. If he can take that third-year jump in the fall and build on what we did this spring, it completely changes the complexity of the interior. Because I could see a scenario where either A, he beats somebody out, perhaps like a Andrew Kristofic, who he's behind right now, or he's so good that you can now use him like as a third guard as part of a rotation, which will help keep Kristofic and Billy Schrauth more fresh as the season wears on. But either way, you're talking about a 325-pound kid that can move people. If all of a sudden the right side of your offensive line is in a situation where Blake Fisher is your lighter of the two blockers, or you know what I mean? Like, let's be real, Ryan. If Blake's going to add weight on, but it's probably getting back up to like 315, 318, at the most 320, he's not going to get back up to 325, 330. If Blake Fisher's your lighter player on the right side, you're moving people this year.
Yeah, man.
And so I think Rocco Spindler, if he can carry this into the fall, Ryan, Rocco Spindler could have a big impact on his football team when you talk about the ability to just go out there and run on people. And we know, we're going to do it. We know we're going to do it. And there's not a dang thing you can do about it. I'd love to see that.
It seemed like kind of midway through spring that the guys that we're talking about most as the potential starters are the guys that you had kind of penciled in before the spring as basically as the favorites, right? It's Billy Schrauth and it's Andrew Kristofic. And we've talked so much about how competition breeds excellence, right? How competition matters so much. And we are also going to look at, like, Andrew Kristofic's a fifth-year player, right? And he has a good floor to him. You're like, that kid, when he was pressing the duty in 2021, played good football, right? Like, he played good football when you needed him most. But is there another guard on the roster that maybe gives you more of an upside, more dynamic ability, more ability to really push the envelope as a run team? And could that be a guy like a Rocco Spindler, right? Like, could it be? It's possible that it could be. But again, in order to get to that point, Rocco was in a position where there wasn't a ton of optimism about him coming into the spring because we know that there were obviously some concerns over the foot quickness and his development and all that great stuff. But coming out of the spring, you feel a lot better that you may have options inside a guard. Like, it might not just be two guys that are penciled in because, yes, they're good, but also they were the like, there was nobody else that could challenge them. Rocco stepped up to the plate this spring. And by the end of the spring, he said, I'm going to be in this conversation at least. Like, I'm not going down swinging. Like, I'm going to go down swinging, if nothing else. So I think it's great. I think it's getting him to take the next step. You also get Charles Jagasaw to come this summer as well for a more competition. Hopefully Ty Chan gets healthy and he's ready to go on full tilt. You need competition
Michael Carmody
inside.
Can put some weight on and
Hopefully, man.
Be healthy.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So you get competition in there, man, and let the best two guards win, or let a platoon happen. Like, there's possibilities that could happen, but ultimately competition is never a bad thing. And I think that it could really help inside because you know that the tackles are going to be very good. You think that the center is also going to be very good, obviously, of the season that he just had, at the end of the season, I should say. The guards are the question mark right now, but I think that there's a lot of talent in that room, and Rocco is a part of that conversation.
Defensively, Ryan, let's talk about some potential breakouts. I think the first one is obvious. Jason Onye. I mean, Jason Onye breaking out in the middle. I sent a picture. I was talking to Sean Davis the other day, and we were just talking about Jason Onye. And I sent him a picture my wife took of him during the game. And you're just like, those guards aren't supposed to look like that. I mean, he's got a six-pack. He's muscular. I brought but the thing is, he doesn't just look the part, right? I've seen guys that look like that can't play football at all.
Can't move
at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what Jason showed this year is that the light has gone on a little bit for him on defensive line. And this is why he had the grade that he had. He had a 3.5-star grade coming out of high school, 4.5-star upside, because you always saw a guy that had the potential. It's just he hadn't played football for very long. And he was one of those guys. I mean, his whole class really just had their careers absolutely wrecked by COVID, as their high school careers wrecked by COVID. And he's a guy that talking about 2019, he started to kind of show a little bit. He had 15 sacks, 76 tackles and 15 sacks. It just was one of those things where you didn't know if the light was ever going to go on. And it started to this spring. And if it does go on, you're talking about Riley Mills and Howard Cross as your starters. And if this version of Jason Onye carries into the fall with Gabriel Rubio working into the mix, now all of a sudden you're talking about, and you've still got guys like Aiden Kana back there who gives you some beef. You're talking about Donovan Heinisch, who had a really good spring. Alexander Ahrensberger played some inside. Tyson Ford, who had he's another guy you could easily mention in this space as well. But Jason Onye having that breakout carrying on the fall, all of a sudden I feel a lot better about the interior of the Notre Dame defensive line if Jason Onye's breakout carries into the fall. A lot better.
Yeah. Hey, so I was going to go defensive line as well. I kind of wrestled between a couple guys. I wanted to go Joshua Burnham because I think that you saw at the end of the spring, the lights start to come on, it seemed like, for him. But I feel like we've talked about him so much that this offseason, right? So I could have used him, but I'm actually going to go with a guy that is also new to the program, Brian. We've seen him at times in the past, but not at a huge volume. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a guy that I am interested to see because you expected him to be a good football player when he got to Notre Dame. But by all indications of what you've seen and what others obviously have been reported, sounds like Javonte had a really nice spring and showcased that he might be even better than what we originally thought Notre Dame was potentially getting out of the Ohio State transfer. And I really think that not only does it have a chance to make two positions better, because you move Riley Mills inside, obviously, from playing strong side end or field end or however you want to quantify it in this offense, but also I think Javonte is a true edge compared to what Riley Mills was, as kind of like that hybrid player, where I think that Javonte Jean-Baptiste, if he is what he showed in this spring and is able to take that momentum into the offseason, he's a guy that could become a little bit of a playmaker from the big end position, which is something that hasn't had enough of over the last couple of years. Like, there's been good players at the big end. We talk about Myron Tagovailoa Amosa. You talk about Riley Mills last year. Good players at big ends, but they didn't have a ton of backfield production from that big end position. And I think Javonte Jean-Baptiste could be a player that you look and say quietly has 5 or 6 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and has some production that you haven't had enough of from an impact perspective at the strong side end. So I felt good about Javonte transferring from Ohio State because I thought at least he would be a solid contributor. But after seeing and hearing what we saw of him from this spring, I think that my expectations have risen a little bit from the Ohio State transfer.
Yeah. I wish we could have seen him in the last couple practices. I would feel a lot better about that if we could, to be honest with you. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of him. Couple other guys who had really good spring breakouts that I think are very important to success in the fall, and that is Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler in different areas. Nolan Ziegler is more of just a pure linebacker rotation guy that hopefully can push one of those, the wheel. I mean, look, I'll just be honest. We were incredibly high on Maris Luafau last year, and I hope that light goes on because he has the ability. But I didn't see anything this spring that would make me think the light has gone on. I don't know if you did in the blue gold game, but I didn't. If Nolan Ziegler can push him, either one, it pushes him out of the lineup, or two, if it's a true competition and Maris still starts, it means Nolan's play pushed Maris to be the player that we always hoped he could be and thought he could be. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
If it's a true competition. And I say that because if it's a true competition, the only way Maris starts is if Maris outplays Nolan. That's the only way he starts. And the only way Maris outplays Nolan is if he improves upon the things that hurt him last year. Yep. Right? That's why true competitions are important. I don't see any scenario in which he beats out J.D. Bertrand this year. I just don't. I think it's more of that will position. And then potentially, at the very least, he becomes like that swing Tavon Coney type guy. Remember, Tavon Coney in 2017 led the team in tackles and tackles for loss and didn't start, but for a couple games that year because he was the backup to Niles and then the backup of Will. I'm not saying Nolan's going to lead the team in tackles. I'm just saying the swing role is the important part of what I'm talking about here. Get a ton of snaps. And then the other one's Jalen Sneed. Yeah. Now, we didn't get a chance to see a ton of Jalen in the spring game doing what we were told behind the scenes was what he was doing so impactfully during spring practice, which was getting after the quarterback in the nickel packages. And so him doing that combined with adding a big jump in speed, just explosiveness and speed, him and Nolan, if they're playing a linebacker this year in any kind of rotation role, gives you and we're people that don't buy into the whole, they're slow at linebacker. Jack Kaiser's not slow. J.D. Bertrand's not slow. Maris Luafau's not slow. The first two guys are short and they're not real long, but they're not slow, right? Those two kids are still a lot faster. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So those guys continue their breakout in the spring, guarantees that if there's a true competition, the starters are going to be much better than they were a year ago because it's either going to be them or the starters that will start are going to be getting a lot more playing time. Or will improve, which will then allow them to justify their playing time. And so that's why it's important for those two guys to really break out and continue what they did in the spring and then build on it in the fall. Because that's what this is all about, right? Like you laid a foundation this spring and you broke out. Now build on that and carry that into the fall. Don't regress. Don't take a step back. Build on it. I think that's a very important part of this.
Well, and linebacker wasn't very good last season, right? Like there were good moments in each spot, but it just wasn't a consistent unit last year from Mike, Will, and Rover. Like there were up and down moments for each of those positions. So if you're Notre Dame, I mean, you also need linebacker position to get better. And in order for it to get better, you need a couple of those younger guys to really step up and push. Because to your point, Brian, maybe JD played pretty good football, but like he could take a step forward, right? Maris Luafau can certainly take a step forward. Jack Kaiser can get better. If they are at least pushed to be the best version of themselves, then you have to give a big assist to guys like Nolan, to guys like Jalen Sneed, because they challenge them to be the best version of themselves, or they take over a bigger role and they showcase the abilities that they have. Either way, linebacker is a position that flat out needs to get better than last season, and they have to be a part of the recipe for that.
I didn't bring up Xavier Watts, Ryan, because I kind of feel like I kind of look at Xavier Watts like I look at Jaden Thomas. We didn't talk about Jaden Thomas much this spring. Goes out,
No.
plays great in the spring game, played good at all. I mean, he actually didn't play much of the spring practice we're at because they were pushing younger players. It's just one of those deals where it's like, yeah, but I kind of already just assume he's going to be pretty good, right? I mean, that may not be fair, but that's just kind of where I'm at. And Xavier Watts is the same way. We didn't see Xavier Watts break out this spring. Do you know why? For me, it's two areas. Number one, I think he already kind of broke out. I thought he was their best safety the last 3 games of the year last year. Number two, the offense literally spent the entire spring avoiding him. So I didn't see him do anything this spring because they avoided him, right? And so to me, that's why Xavier Watts isn't in this conversation. Now, he needs to carry that over, right?
Yes.
But this is a different conversation. We kind of went into the spring expecting Xavier to be that dude. So I don't count that as a breakout. We expect him to be that dude, not just because of his talent, because he already showed it at the end of the year. He can be a difference maker. I mean, we saw him in 3 games make more disruptive plays, tackles for loss, sacks, breakups, throwing off, adjustments for receivers than we saw from the safety position the entire year, in my opinion. When you look at the impact he made on the ball, is that an outrageous statement to make, Ryan? You talk about he had a tackle for loss on a sack against Boston College. He went out against USC and had several breakups in that game. He had a huge breakup against South Carolina that ended up scoring on the next play on a fake, but it forced them into that situation. So I kind of view him as a breakout already. We didn't see Ramon break out. None of the corners had true breakouts with one exception. I thought Jaden Mickey was a guy that had a very good spring. And if Jaden can carry that, yes. If he can carry that into the season, now all of a sudden you're in a situation where Notre Dame has a legitimate corner rotation where they can give Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison legit reps off in the non-big games. Meaning that I'm not taking Benjamin Morrison off the field against Ohio State. I'm not. But if I can take him off the field every third series against Navy, Tennessee State, Central Michigan, Duke, NC State, those are important games. But I'm talking about like the teams that are when I say big game, I'm not even talking about the best teams. I'm talking about the teams that are just loaded at that position that you just can't afford to take him off the field.
Right.
And so that's why I don't even count Clemson because you could afford to take him off the field for a series if you have a good player because Clemson's receiving core doesn't scare me right now. USC's does. Ohio State's definitely does. And I can't afford to take him off the field because if they look at that and say, okay, I got Marvin Harrison against their number 3 cornerback, they're going to do exactly what they did in the game last year when Tariq Bracy got hurt. Hey, their nickel who's been killing us all game just went off the field. They just brought in a true freshman. Guess where we're going on this next play, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from. Mickey's another one that if he can build on what he did this spring, the cornerback depth chart becomes even stronger than it already was. Yep. Chance Tucker needs to. I don't think Chance had a breakout. I think Chance started to show some of that promise. Now he's got to break out in the fall. But I thought Jaden had a bit of a breakout, and he took advantage, Ryan. This is what I think you talked about before the spring. He's got to take advantage of Cam Hart not practicing and not being in those team periods. And I thought he did. I really do. I thought he did.
I thought him and Christian Gray, before he had to get the scope, I thought they both played really good football. So, I mean, to your point, Brian, you know who Benjamin Morrison is now. You know who Cam Hart is. And I would still contend that Cam Hart, despite being a 5th-year player now, still has some upside that he can tap into, man. Like, I still don't think Cam Hart's the best version of himself. I don't. But the general fact is that you know who those 2 football players are. You don't really know who Christian Gray is yet. You don't really know who Jaden Mickey is yet. But if you are able to get contributions out of those 2, then that makes your secondary just so much more flexible at times too, man. Like maybe instead of, playing a true nickel in certain situations, maybe you say like one of those other corners is too good not to be on the field. So like maybe even throw them out and you give them 3 cornerback looks at times. So that makes you so much more valuable because we are in a game today where when you play against USC, to your point, right? They're going to have 3 to 4 wide receivers on the field most of the time. Like that's just going to be the situation you're in. So there might be times where you have to say, hey, we might have to get a true corner on the field compared to a rover or even a nickel at times. Like there might be that situation. And I think that flexibility could be something that Jaden Mickey brings. I think it could be something that Christian Gray brings. And hopefully Chance Tucker could bring. But if we're talking about guys that I would quantify as breakouts, to your point, Jaden Mickey would be in that conversation. And despite Christian Gray missing the last few practices, obviously, I think he fits in that conversation as well, because Christian Gray was having a really strong spring before he was hurt, unfortunately. So it's one of those corners, man. I think that both of them have a chance to play. And if they do, and they're good players and they're really good contributors, then Notre Dame's cornerback room just went from arguably one of the best duos in college football to arguably one of the best cornerback rooms in college football very quickly.
I want to talk about the transfers out, Ryan. And I think this is an interesting situation, because I think what we're seeing from Notre Dame fans are two extremes that both have merit. And on one extreme, it's, well, and there's truth to this, and I've said this before, not in a dismissive way, but a factual way about why they left. We saw Tyler Buckner, Logan Diggs, Prince Collie, and Lorenzo Styles all transfer. Some of those weren't surprising. None of them were shocking, but a couple of them I'd hoped that it wouldn't happen. I was never going to be shocked when Logan Diggs transferred. I just hoped it didn't happen. I was not at all shocked that Lorenzo Styles transferred. I was not at all shocked that Prince Collie transferred. We expected that one especially. I'd hoped that Lorenzo, well, I wouldn't say hoped. I wasn't 100% certain that Lorenzo was going to transfer, but this has been something that you and I have been talking about since December, November. We were starting to hear this stuff.
Fans have been talking about it too.
Exactly. It's and he did exactly what people have been talking about for 5 months, which is go to Ohio State and move to corner. I mean, it's not a secret. It's not something like, oh, gee. Like when I put in the transfer article, like I expect him to go to Ohio State, that wasn't like breaking news. I think people would have been more shocked if he didn't go to Ohio State.
Yeah.
And then obviously Tyler Buckner, no one is shocked by it, but I think we all kind of hoped that he would stick it through.
It's a disappointing one.
Right. Yeah. But the answer, the one extreme answer is, well, they all got beat out or were number twos. That's why they left. And there's truth to that. Tyler Buckner got beat out for a certain quarterback job. Yep. Lorenzo Styles not only got beat out by Tobias Merriweather, but there was greater risk that he would get beat out by Rico Flores than there was that he would then pass up Tobias Merriweather. And then Prince Collie, he wasn't going to push anybody to start. And then he was getting pushed by younger guys. And he didn't leave because he got beat out as much as he just wasn't happy here. I don't think he ever clicked with the new staff the way he did the people that recruited him to come to Notre Dame, like Nick Lazinski and Clark Lee. It happens. No fault, nothing negative against Prince, but it's just the reality of it. He was always a better special teams player than he was a linebacker. So no big deal. That's one extreme. Mm-hmm. I'm not with you on that, right? They're all valid points. Those guys all did get beat out, but it doesn't mean that just because that's true that's no big deal. The other extreme is, oh my gosh, the program's coming to an end. You lost Tyler Buckner, you lost Logan Diggs, you lost Lorenzo Styles, you lost Prince Collie, you lost 3 top 100 players from your roster.
The sky's falling.
Yeah. The sky's falling. Clearly, there's something there. I've heard people call it a sinking ship, which I found to be incredibly absurd. Is Marcus Freeman message not getting through, and then there's that extreme.
Yeah,
and it's 2 giant overreactions, in my opinion, but both have some merit. Now, the side that just is going off their minds, the whole sinking ship, Marcus Freeman's this, that, or the other thing, that's nonsense. But that this could be really impactful negatively to the depth chart, that has merit.
100%.
Right? That has merit. So both sides have some merit. So let's kind of talk about where Notre Dame is at those positions, Ryan, and why both sides have merit and what needs to happen for Notre Dame to be okay. Because I don't think it's as easy as just losing a talent like Tyler Buckner and a talent like Logan Diggs and a talent like Lorenzo Styles and a talent like Prince Collie and just be like, no big deal. Could it be that way? Yeah, it could end up being that way, but you can't dismiss it. And I want to start off with Tyler. I think if Sam Hartman's healthy all year, this one's simple. If Sam Hartman's healthy all year, they're fine for the season. It's not going to hurt them at all. Where it could hurt them is twofold, Ryan, is if, number one, Sam Hartman goes down, especially early, and number two, There's now a much bigger question mark about who the starting quarterback is going to be in 24. Now, and I know, well, but you got Angeli and Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. I get all that.
Sure.
But wouldn't you feel better about having those three and Tyler Buckner?
100%.
And that way, if Tyler Buckner gets beat out, then you know those guys are ready, as opposed to if they don't go to the portal next year, one of those three is going to start. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to start. It just means that one of them is going to have to start. And I worry that it might force the staff to go to the portal again next year. And I don't necessarily want to do that. And it also puts you in a situation now where the starter could then cause a ripple effect where maybe, like, let's say Steve Angeli doesn't win the starting job next spring. Do you think he's going to stick around? I'm concerned about that because now he's in the same boat that Tyler Buckner was in. So it raises some questions about the future for sure, no matter what Sam Hartman does.
Right.
But they're going to be okay this year if Sam Hartman stays healthy. But if you're just someone who says, well, they'll be fine because they have Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie, what are you basing that off of? I'm as high on – I mean, I literally had Kenny Minchie ranked as a top 100 recruit. I love Kenny Minchie, but this is a kid who missed half of his senior season of high school and is, to me, not ready right now to be that guy. Maybe by the end of the year he will be, but he's not there right now.
Yeah.
And, Steve Angeli is a great backup quarterback, a guy that can come in and get you out of a game. If Sam Hartman goes down in the third quarter, I think that Steve Angeli can come off the bench and rally you and lead you to a victory. He's the prototype backup quarterback. But if he has to start 5 games and it happens to be during that stretch where they play USC and Ohio State, I'm not nearly as comfortable about winning those football games now because I don't think he's a guy that's going to go out there and make the plays you need to make to win those football games. I hope he proves me wrong, but that's where I'm at. You know what I mean? That's kind of who I am when it comes to this conversation. So you hope that you won't need the backup quarterback. But we have seen in past years that the backup quarterbacks had to be counted on. And it's I don't know who that guy is. Somebody just said Steve Angeli is the best quarterback on our roster. That's the example of the extreme overreaction over here that just doesn't have a lot of merit, in my opinion.
He's better than a kid that's top 20 all time in touchdown passes and passing yards.
I hope there's a little bit of joke in there.
Probably. There probably is.
But anyway, so this could be a situation that proves problematic if there's an injury this season, and it certainly puts a lot of pressure on the younger quarterbacks to get ready a little faster than they otherwise might have had to get ready. Maybe they get ready and beat out Tyler Buckner next year. That could happen. Would you be shocked if Kenny Minchie, has a great development and pushes Tyler for the starting quarterback job? I wouldn't be shocked. No. But I'm also not guaranteeing it in a year.
I also wouldn't be shocked if CJ Carr is just so good that he comes in and it's just like
at some point as a freshman,
man. Yeah. Like that's a guy. Yeah. Like what are we gonna do there? So
where maybe you start somebody else and then kind of like they did with Trevor Lawrence in 2018 kind of thing. Yeah, I mean I could see that. But now, Ryan, let me say this. But now you may have to do that. And this is what we've always said. I don't want to have to play a younger guy. I want to play a younger guy because he's the best guy for the job.
100%.
Not because what are my options? Yeah. And that's the concern for me.
Well, I mean, the immediacy is the thing that I always harp on quickest, right? Because that's going to affect us, in the most real amount of time here. And the fact of the matter is that you're one bad play, God forbid, away from having to go that backup route. Like that's kind of the game of football is that you're only one play away sometimes. And you can't get past this fact. The fact is that behind Sam Hartman now, there is no quarterback on the roster that's thrown a pass on the college level. Like that's a thing, right? I mean, Kenny Minchie's a true freshman quarterback. Steve Angeli played in a couple football games last year, but he didn't throw a pass for the University of Notre Dame. So you don't have any proven commodity behind a guy like Sam Hartman, excuse me. And then the long term is very important because, yes, I think that CJ Carr could be a star for Notre Dame. I think Kenny Minchie could be a star for Notre Dame potentially. But we know that players develop at different rates. Will redshirt freshman Kenny Minchie be ready to be that guy? It's possible, but also it's the other possibility that he's not quite ready. CJ Carr is a true freshman. Could he be that guy? Yes. Could he also not be that guy as a true freshman? Yeah, that's also very possible, right? So it's the proven commodity. So we're talking about proven commodity versus unknown. And yes, Tyler Buckner still had a lot to prove.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is that he just scored 5 touchdowns in The last time we ever saw him, and they beat an SEC school where they scored over 40 points, and it could have been more if there was a couple less turnovers in that game. So the proven commodity is now gone. There is not proof behind Sam Hartman right now. There is still talent behind Sam Hartman, and there certainly will be in 2024, especially when CJ Carr gets to town.
Right.
But ultimately, until you see it on the football field, everything is an unknown. And that's what you have behind Sam Hartman right now. So you can't feel great about the backup quarterback position in the actuality of putting him on the football field, because you have never seen what a Steve Angeli-led offense will look like. You've never seen what a Kenny Minchey-led offense will look like. You have no idea. And that's the troubling part of this conversation, obviously.
Let's look at running back, how the impact of Logan Diggs hurts Notre Dame. I think anyone just saying, hey, it's no big deal, they're loaded at running back, is partially true, but also being a little too dismissive of losing a guy that just had over 1,000 yards of total offense last year. Now, I know where this is coming from. The team, because we had Team Estimate and Team Diggs among the fan base last year. I mean, that's just flat out true. And what's fun, and by the way, the guy that said that about Angeli was being sarcastic, because his next follow-up comment was, but Sam Hartman threw over 30 picks and Angeli has none. So he's clearly being sarcastic. So appreciate you clearing that up, Colton. I was like, come on, man. But I appreciate you clearing that up. But back to the running back conversation. You can't tell me, like, Team Diggs, Team Estimate. And I don't know why fans do this. I don't get it. I don't understand, like, why people can't look at the good that Tyler Buchner brings to the table and then also dismiss the bad. But if you say anything good about Tyler Buchner, it's like that guy that I just blocked from the thing that just, like, talking like a 12-year-old, like, well, what about this? Right. We've talked about that. We've never said he's a finished product, but the fact that you can't admit that he's done some really good things says more about you than it does me or Tyler Buchner, right? That's the reality of it. Same thing with Logan Diggs. You get these people that will just constantly point to Logan Diggs as, well, he's not explosive. He only averaged 5 yards a carry. I'm like, okay. Part of the reason he averaged 5 yards a carry and Logan Diggs and Audric Estimate averaged 5.9 is because in a lot of games, Logan Diggs was getting the carries early, wearing the defense down. Audric comes in the third and fourth quarter and rips off some big runs. I mean, for all we know, if you reverse roles, that would have happened with Audric. I don't know the answer to that. I also watched that kid have a 75-yard touchdown and a 39-yard touchdown run, 75-yard touchdown catch and a 39-yard touchdown run that gave Notre Dame the go-ahead touchdown in the second half against South Carolina. Or was that the one that tied it? I think that might have been the one no, it gave them the lead, 38-31, right?
The lead. Yeah.
So why can't we just embrace the fact that they're both really good? But that's just kind of how. So if you were a Team Estimate person and you're going to be, no big deal. That's incorrect. I don't buy that. I think the flip side of it too is, well, they're just screwed now because none of these other guys have played. There's some merit to that as far as none of them played. We talked about this yesterday, Ryan. The running backs behind Audric Estimate have two career rushes for 5 yards, right? Okay, that's a very fair thing to point out. The reality is in Logan Diggs, you had a proven running back. Even if all he did was repeat what he did last year, that's a good running back. Now, what I think was going to happen is I do think Audric Estimate was going to somewhat separate himself a little bit, assuming Audric can prove that he can be a higher volume guy, which he has not proven yet to this point. I think people look at Audric Estimate and say, look how big he is. He's an every down back. He wore down last year after like 10 carries in games. He was young. There's other things that factor into that, but he's got to prove to me he can be a 15 carry a week guy, bell cow, and that he can hold on to the football. I'm much more optimistic about that now because after the UNLV game, we never saw him put the ball on the ground again.
Cleaned it up, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was all technical stuff. It wasn't like he has small hands or really short foot, really, because you can have fumbling problems if you have really short arms. Not all guys with short arms do, but some can, some can. It was just, hey, man, don't extend the ball against North Carolina, right? As you're running, and just protect the ball when you're in the open field so that way guys coming from behind you, like against Stanford, don't knock it out. It's technical stuff. He cleaned it up, and he did better down the stretch. He's got to prove that he can be that guy. There's talented depth behind him. My concern, however, is you can't ignore the fact that two of the three guys that we're depending on for Notre Dame are guys that have been injury prone, or at least in Jabron Payne's case and in Jadarian Price's case is coming off of a very damaging injury that we don't know for a fact that he's going to look like the guy he was before. We put his highlights. Brian Smith put his highlights on our board the other day of a clip that he took when he went and saw Jadarian play in person. And then I put his senior year highlights on. I'm like, I think we forget how good this kid is. Here's the thing, Ryan. We don't know that he's ever going to be that guy again. That's the nature of Achilles injuries. It's the modern day ACL. That's how the ACL used to be. 30 years ago, if you tore your ACL, there's a good chance you weren't going to be the same athlete anymore.
Nope.
Nowadays, it's no big deal. Achilles are still that one where there's still some like, I don't know what he's going to be when he comes back at this point in time. And so you can't ignore that no matter how talented you think he is. And he's a guy that I had as ranked as a top 100 recruit. So him being really good is not a shock to us, but we can't just ignore the fact that those two rising sophomores have never proven that they can be healthy over the course of an entire season.
I mean, and then outside of that, you have Jeremiah Love coming in, which is an incredibly talented football player. I mean, I would say that he's a top 50 player in the 2023 class, in my opinion. But you've never seen him on the college level yet. He's still an unknown. I mean, and he's also a player that isn't going to get here until the summer, right? So he's not an early enrollee where you like, okay, he's been in the weight room, he's been acclimating, he's been able to focus, learn the playbook, all the things that go into that transitional period. You don't know about Jeremiah Love. I think Jeremiah Love's going to be a star whenever he does get his opportunities, but is that going to be in 2023? I have no idea. So the depth behind Audric Estime, while talented, has question marks a part of it. The injuries with two guys, and then just the freshman transition stuff with the other. So you'll have talent there. There's no doubt about it. And you also have a little bit of insurance in the sense that if worse comes to worse, you do have Chris Tyree where you could just slide back into running back and be like, hey, Chris, we need you, man. Like, we need you, right? So there is some insurance, but regardless, that makes one position weaker than what it potentially could be if you have to go that emergency route. So I think Audric could be that guy. I think he's going to be a stud. I truly do. I think the depth behind him is impressive, but to your points, behind him right now is 2 carries for 5 yards. That's where we are.
And an Achilles injury and a guy that basically was not healthy for his final 2 years of high school football.
Yep.
You can't ignore that. You can't. And 5 is the ideal number at running back. Now, that's the negative side. Let's take the counter argument. What needs to happen for them to be okay? Well, for number one, if everybody's healthy, they're fine. And now this is coming from someone who's very high on Logan Diggs, have always been very high on Logan Diggs. So this is not coming from someone who is dismissive of, I wish Logan would have stayed. I'd much rather have a backfield with him there than not with him there. So keep that in mind. I've always been a very high on Logan Diggs. But the reality is, if Jadarian Price is back to full speed, he's a better player than Logan. He's a better talent than Logan Diggs. I'll say that. I don't know he's going to be a better player because he's, it's going to be his first college action. But he's more talented. He's more explosive. He's every bit as powerful. And he's a different style than Audric. Audric and Logan they have different skill sets, but they're very similar backs. You're going to run the same stuff with those two guys in the game. The Clemson game, Ryan, you and I have kind of joked about this. I couldn't tell who was who from up in the press box. I mean, you might have been able to on the television, but in this press box, I couldn't tell. Because, as far as the way we are, it's harder sometimes, especially night games, to see like Audric's darker than Logan, right? And Chris Tyree. But with Chris Tyree, I could see he's smaller. But Audric and Logan are very similar in style. They both have a single-digit number. So when we're up in the press box, I can't see at night, oh, that's the darker-skinned kid than the lighter-skinned kid, and that means I know it's Audric. Because the way they were playing, I couldn't tell the difference. Right. I mean, one cut, hammer it, running people over. I'm like, is that Audric or Logan? And then he'd get up, and I'm like, oh, that's Audric. I'd look at it. Oh, it's Audric. Look at the TV. It's Audric. But Logan ran just like Audric, and Audric ran just like Logan. It was phenomenal. But that's the point. The same exact offense you're going to run with Logan, you're running with Audric and vice versa. With Jadarian, I think he brings a little bit to where maybe you might want to run a little bit more zone. You might want to run some buck sweep with him. You might want to do some things to get him to the perimeter that you may not do with Audric. And I think that's kind of where it's a little bit more complementary than Logan and Audric.
Yeah.
And I think, and then I also think he is the best home run hitter they have at running back. That includes Jeremiah Love, in my opinion, as a pure runner right now. And so if he's healthy, they're fine. If Jabron Payne is healthy, Notre Dame is fine. If you have to go into a game with Jabron Payne as your number 2 running back and he's healthy, I'm good.
Yep.
I'm good, Ryan. I mean, we can go win this game. If Logan and Jabron are both healthy, and God forbid something happened to Audric where he's out for a game, I'm good. They're good if they're healthy. If they're not, now you're in trouble. Yeah. But the talent is there. And here's the thing on Jeremiah Love. The thing I don't love about this is you now have to play Jeremiah. I said, I don't care who it is. I don't want to play a freshman because I have to. I want to play a freshman because he's ready to play. I think Jeremiah will prove himself ready to play. It's just now you've got to expedite the process a little bit. And I don't love that. I would have rather been just like, okay, week 4, the light went on and Jeremiah's just too good not to play. Now you're going to have to play him, which could end up being a good thing down the road, even meaning second half of this upcoming season. Yeah. But you're going to have to play him now. So if they're all healthy, I'm good. I mean, and as you mentioned, if one guy goes down, you do have Chris Tyree that you can use to get the ball carry. Here's the other part of this too. I think a mistake that some of the people that are concerned about how to replace Logan are making is you're assuming that the intention is that one guy has to replace all of Logan's production, and I don't think that's the case. Yeah. So you look at last year, Ryan. Logan Diggs had 165 carries. 822 yards, 5 yards a carry. Also, 165 isn't okay. Jadarian Price has got to do all that. Jabron Payne's got to do all that. Or even if they got to split it. Number one is, I would imagine at least 30 of those carries to be taken by Audric, just because we're going to see less of a pure rotation as we saw last year. Now, Audric's got to prove he can be that bell cow from snap 1 to snap 50 in a game, right? But he's got the talent to be a 15-plus touch a game guy. He was at 12 last year. I think he can get 15 to 18 on average. The big games, 20. Hopefully the Tennessee State's 10. That's how you get there, right? Yep. So he's going to take some of those touches. The 2 backs behind him are going to so that's, let's say he takes 30 of those. Now that's 135. And then you look at a situation where the two backs behind him, let's say they both get average 50 carries, which is not much if we're being honest. I mean, Notre Dame's number 3 running back last year had 100 carries. Yeah. Right? Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree both had over 50 carries the year before. Let's just, so they split that up because really you need also take into account those 100 carries by Chris Tyree as well. But you're going to split that up, and there's now 35 carries to be spread out in, Jeremiah Love, potentially some backup guy. Then you have the 100 carries from Chris Tyree, and you add about 20 more to each guy. You see where I'm kind of going with this, right? But here's the thing you got to remember too: this is going to be a different looking offense this year for Notre Dame. Yep. And a lot of what they're going to do. So if you look at last year, for example, Ryan, Notre Dame last season ranked 21st in the nation in attempts per game at 40 attempts per game. They only had Tyler Buckner for 3 games, which means most of those attempts, and they didn't give up a ton of sacks last year. So most of those attempts were pure runs. Well, now that Chris Tyree's at running back, he's still going to get his carries. He's still going to get, I hope, 3 or 4 carries a game. So he's still going to get, let's say, 30 of his 100 from last year. So now that 100 doesn't have to be split up the same way, right? You're going to have RPOs are going to be part of it. Where last year, certain plays that were running into crowded boxes are not going to be running into crowded boxes this year. That's going to take some of the touches away that we saw last year. And then just naturally, this team is going to throw a little bit more. And if this team is as efficient as I think it's going to be, that's also going to take away some of the attempts, because now an 8-play drive becomes a 5-play drive. A 6-play drive becomes a 4 to 3-play drive. And I think those are the things that you look at and say, all those things factor in to where you just don't expect them to have to account for every single touch that Logan Diggs had with a running back. And that's why I'm just not as concerned that you have to replace all of that with just the way that some people are thinking, because if you look at some of the more efficient offenses in the country, they don't run a ton of plays. Ohio State last year, Ryan, averaged 490.7 yards per game. Notre Dame averaged 396.2 yards per game. That's like a little less over 100-yard difference, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. In 13 games last year, Ohio State had 876 plays. Notre Dame had 870. Ohio State only ran 6 more plays than Notre Dame did all year. Why? Their yards per play was way up. And a lot of those plays, because they blew teams out, were being executed by their backups, right? So those things all factor into, in my opinion, Ryan, why I'm just not concerned about it if everyone is healthy, because it's not just Jadarian Price has got to take on those 165 carries and
Sure.
the pass game touches, or him and Gibran have to make up all of them themselves. And really, you look at 265 because you want to count Chris Tyree moving. I think that's kind of where if they're healthy, there's a plan. They're going to be fine if they're healthy. But this is football, and it's hard for running backs to stay healthy, an entire group to stay healthy for 12 games.
Yep.
In my opinion. But that's also why I think the schedule sets up really nicely right now, because 3 of your 4 first games are honestly teams you should smash, which means you should be able to limit some of the early season bang on Audric Estime, and also give you some games to get Logan and Jadarian into more of a groove where you're not kicking the season off in Columbus, Ohio against the Buckeyes. So I think that helps too. So again, if they're healthy, Ryan, all of that being said, that's why I'm confident that they're going to be okay at running back if they're healthy. But if they're not healthy, you're going to start saying, boy, I wish I wouldn't have been so dismissive of Logan Diggs. I hope we don't ever get there, but that's where we are right now with this.
Well, I think the diversity is the biggest thing for me that you kind of mentioned, right? It was because I do think that Audric and Logan can do a lot of the same things that you talked about. Jadarian Price brings a completely different skill set. Gibran Payne brings a different skill set. And Jeremiah Love also brings a different skill set than what Audric has. And honestly, all those guys are pretty unique in their own ways. You know, I mean, I think that there's some parts of their games that are reminiscent of one another, but all of those guys are super unique in the sense that Jadarian Price is a 5'10", 200-pound home run waiting to happen, a guy that can really one cut and go type of back. Then you have Gibran, who's more of that 200 to 205, 210, somewhere in that ballpark, who's Logan Diggs-ish with how he kind of approaches the game with a little bit more juice. And then Jeremiah loves that high cut, one cut, see ya type of running back.
Josh Adams.
Yes.
I mean, he's the Josh Adams type. Yes.
Yeah. So you have completely different skill sets, which are very unique to one another. And if all of them are healthy and all of them are contributing, that's a headache for a defense. I talk about this all the time, man. Defenses want to feel comfortable. How do you make them feel comfortable? They know what's coming. They know what to expect. Cool. You have Audric Estime. I have to prepare myself adequately. Audric Estime is out of the game. Here comes another back that plays like Audric Estime. I'm still good. My thought process is the same. I'm prepared for this. I'm not prepared for Audric Estime coming out of the football game and you putting Jeremiah Love in the game, who can one false step and he's out of here. And he's just going to bring a different approach to the game. So as a defense, that's my worst nightmare, is having to think on the move, having to prepare for multiple skill sets. And that's what Notre Dame can bring to the game. And to your point, there's questions about it, right? This is not a foregone conclusion. This is not a known commodity. But the point is, and the reason that I think that you have optimism, is because there's talent in that room, certainly. There's a lot of talent in that room, certainly. So yes, there is some projection. There are things that need to happen from a health perspective that you need to see, and a transitional perspective that you need to see with a Jeremiah Love as a true freshman. But if all those guys are ready to go and are healthy, then you have a diverse backfield that has some home run potential, has some wear you down potential. You can hit all avenues with this backfield, but it is obviously there are some dependencies to getting to that level.
Let's move on to receiver, Ryan.
Yep.
This is one where we're spending the least amount of time on, honestly. This is the one loss more than any other that I'm just not concerned about. I feel about this loss a lot like I felt like some of the losses on the D-line last year. I think I look at it like this, Ryan. I feel like sometimes no matter the talent of a player, the personality, the attitude can become a distraction.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where Logan had gotten to. Or excuse me, Lorenzo had gotten to.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's a bad kid. I'm just saying it just didn't click with him and Coach Stuckey. Just didn't click. And it got to the point where it just, to me, it was just unproductive. And it was time for him to move on, in my view. I hope he goes to Ohio State and does great. I have no ill will towards Logan, or Lorenzo, but it was time to move on, in my view. And part of the reason it was time to move on as well is because, simply put, he was just getting beat out. That's the reason they were talking about him possibly moving to cornerback, is because it was very clear that he wasn't going to start over Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Thomas. And he wasn't close to either one of those guys. Now, I saw some good things from Lorenzo this spring. He was running with authority. He was running with purpose. He looked to have a little bit of a pep in his step. But the thing is, he still fought the football, right? And he just wasn't the player those guys were on a consistent basis. So he was going to be a rotation guy. Now, if his attitude was where I wanted to be, I would have liked to have had him in the rotation, but it wasn't. And I felt like it was time to kind of move on from that. And I also think the other part of it too is, you look at it, he was probably going to be their fifth receiver this year. I mean, it was very obvious in the spring that they were forcing the issue with Chris Tyree in the slot. He was going to play in the slot, which meant Lorenzo was going to be more limited to that outside role, where he was just flat out not going to play more than Tobias Merriweather, barring injury. So I'm good there. I'm good there. Plus, you can't ignore the fact that the freshmen played great this spring.
Yes.
And it's a talented group that's ready to play. Running back and receiver, in my view, are the two, I've said this before, the two easiest positions for a freshman to come in and make a transition. It's never easy. This is college football. It's never easy. It's the easiest of all the position groups. And you've got three guys, in my opinion, that are already on campus. And Caleb Smith will show up this spring, and we'll see if he's able to pick things up and all that. Athletically, Caleb Smith can help you if you need him to. Athletically. I don't know if you'll necessarily need him to, because I project him as more of a slot, Ryan. I think you do as well. And I don't know if you'll need that early on. But the outside guys, Braylon James can give you Will Fuller type of snaps like Will Fuller did as a freshman in 2013, where he had 6 catches for like 160 yards. He can give you some of the Chris Brown snaps from 2012. Chris Brown only had 2 catches, but he played. He was in the rotation, and one of those catches was pretty big, right, against Oklahoma. Braylon is a take the top off. He only can run 3 routes, but you let him run those 3. I'm not saying that I'm being hyperbolic. And so he can give you that, even if he's not a full-time guy. But Rico and Jaden have proven that they're ready to be. They picked up the offense well. They showed up as precise route runners. So these are ones that Coach Stuckey doesn't even have to really groom them the way that he did. He needs to do with Braylon, and he needs to do with like Tobias to some degree. Tobias showed up as a pretty good route runner as well. But Dion and some of those guys, I mean, they show up ready to play, which means you can now focus on more of the mental part. And that's the other thing too, with all the veterans, is they're all a year older. The technical aspects have improved to the point where you don't have to continue to fix those problems from before. And if you can't watch what the receivers did last year and see their development over the course of the year from a technical standpoint, then I would say I don't know if you know what you're looking for in that regard. And people that argue, well, production equals coaching improvement. No, the minute the receivers can start throwing to themselves for an entire game, then we can talk about that, right? But to see the growth that Jaden Thomas made technically, to watch Dion in the last 5 games start to really look like, okay, now we're starting to see glimpses of why he was a top recruit in that class. And Jaden Thomas was a completely different player from the first 3 games to the last 7 games. So we know the technical improvement came. Now that that's there and these freshmen are already ready to go from a technical standpoint, now you can start focusing more on scheme and making sure that they're really scheme sound and have all the nuances part of it. That's partly why I'm getting excited about what they're going to be in the fall. Now they got to go show it, right? All these guys got to show it, but that was true of Lorenzo too. But this is a freshman class can flat out be your 4, your 5, and your 6, and I feel good about it. I really do, Ryan. And you and I, the only argument you and I had was which of the freshmen is going to be the most ready, right? Jaden or Rico. And it was a positive argument, meaning we were arguing we expect them both to be ready, but which one of the two that will be ready is going to be the most ready, as opposed to which three of these guys that don't know what they're doing are going to be ready to help out this year because they have to. You know what I mean? And that's a good place to be. So I'm good at receiver. And here's the deal too. Matt Salerno can help you. And I know fans don't want to hear that. Some fans don't want to hear that. But Matt Salerno is your number 5 or your number 6 is going to help you. We saw it in the spring game. We saw it last year. The problem last year, sometimes you needed him to be your 2 at times last year early in the season. That's not where Matt Salerno is going to help you. Matt's going to help you as the 5, as the 6, veteran leadership, coming in, blocking his butt off like he did on that touchdown run we were talking about earlier with Logan Diggs. It wasn't the right side of the line that opened up that hole for a touchdown. It was Matt Salerno taking that DB and driving him all the way inside of Blake Fisher and letting Logan cut off outside of him. He showed the catch he had against Ohio State. I don't want him being a starter that's playing 50 snaps, but he can help you as part of rotation. So between the 3 starters, Tobias, Dion, and Jaden, you got Chris Tyree, you've got Matt Salerno, plus the freshman. Notre Dame's good at receiver. I mean, the only caveat is if you have a couple of injuries, you could get into some trouble. Yeah. But even then, it's that's the last position I'm worried about. I'm not looking in the portal unless some stud wants to come. You're good there. Keep rolling, keep coaching them, get yourself ready to go because that group's going to be pretty good. So this is the one of all 4 of them. This is the one I'm least concerned about for a number of reasons. That's a lot, Ryan.
Yeah.
Response to that long.
So you're saying that I get to see more of Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores play? Oh,
I know.
No, what a
I know
shit.
You're so bummed. I know you're so upset, Ryan.
I really liked Lorenzo, the talent. I really did, man. I mean, I'll never hide from that, right? I thought he was going to be a really good football player at Notre Dame. Unfortunately, talked about it. There was a confidence issue that happened last year, and that confidence issue transpired into, I don't want to call it cancerous, but it just wasn't a great fit into the room at the end of the day. That's just kind of where it went. And with how Coach Stuckey and this offensive staff has recruited the wide receiver position in 2023, it was tremendous to have all 3 of those kids come in as true freshmen in the spring because that prepared you for this moment. It did. Because now you could say, and it was big for, honestly, because Deion Colsey's been banged up at times in the past, right? Last spring, he was a guy that was limited in a lot of that spring. You came out of the spring, though, healthy at wide receiver. You feel good. Tobias is healthy. Deion's healthy. Chris Tyree's healthy. Jaden Thomas is healthy. Jaden was another guy that had some, a little bit of durability stuff. So you are healthy. You are deeper than you were a year ago. And you got a lot of talent, man. As long as it's developed properly, I agree. I don't think it's going to be a massive blow. I'm disappointed of how it ended up with Lorenzo Styles at Notre Dame because I still think Lorenzo is a really talented football player as far as his physical skills, but it just never came to fruition for him. So unfortunate. I hope he does really well at Ohio State in the role that he's going to play there on defense. But Notre Dame is recruited well enough and has the guy as a developer at the top at wide receiver coach and Chancey Stuckey, where I look at it and I say, I think you're going to be fine. I think you're going to be good, man. And the fact that they're all healthy and that the 3 freshmen came in and looked as ready as each of them did, because I didn't expect Braylon James to come in and look ready during spring. I was very upfront about that. But he came in and he looked like he could help you in some capacity in 2023. So having all that insurance and having the health that you have in that room right now, you're good, man. It would completely change it if you had a couple injuries in that room and there were a couple weird timelines, and that would completely change the equation. But everyone's healthy. Everyone is talented. And I think the depth is going to be able to withstand this defection, in my opinion.
I feel the same way at linebacker with Prince Colley. Yeah. I liked Prince. He wasn't always healthy. He was a very good special teams player. I think that's where the miss is going to be greater is special teams. Because he was a very good special teams player. But again, we'll see Nolan and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Ausberry and Drake Bowen. And this is why you recruit the way you do. Yes. The way Notre Dame has. This is why recruiting at those positions is so important, because you can have a guy 5 years ago, a guy like Prince Colley leaves, and it's oh my gosh, this is a problem.
What are we going to do? Yeah.
Now it's I would have rather Prince stayed. I like Prince. I think he's a talented athlete. But you're kind of to me, him getting passed up by Nolan Ziegler was more of a matter of when, not if. And same with Jalen Sneed. It was more of a matter of when, not if, because those guys are just a little bit more naturally instinctive, I think, than Prince was. Prince never just looked, and that was always going to be a little bit of the concern. I just thought eventually he'll get there. And I think he'll still get there. I mean, he's only a sophomore this year. It's not like writing him off. It just was by the time the light went on, would you have already been passed up by younger guys who are probably a little bit more talented than you are? And so that's where I kind of come from. But you're in a situation now where I think there could be some issues down the road, Ryan, if they don't recruit well in 24, as we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
But for this season, I think Notre Dame is just fine at linebacker. I don't anticipate there being any issues when it comes to their positioning and their depth and being able to put a good special teams and those type of things, because you're going to add 4 weapons to your special teams that you didn't have last year because they didn't play Nolan, they didn't play Jalen on special teams, and now you talk about Drake Bowen and Jaden Alsbury.
Yeah,
I think they're going to be fine.
I think it's like wide receiver too, where you had 3 early enrollees at the linebacker position, which helps. You know, it helps comfort that blow a little bit. Like, yeah, I mean, it's a defection, it's a loss of a talented football player on the depth chart. Like, all those things are true, but you've kind of, I guess, supplemented that with other very talented football players, right? Like you've cushioned that blow, in my opinion. And again, you're in a situation where Prince Kali, if he came out and had a great spring and had a great offseason, maybe he's the key backup at will linebacker. But it's not like it wasn't a foregone conclusion that he was going to be your backup will in 2023. Like, it just wasn't a foregone conclusion. So having Nolan step up, to your point, but also having 3 freshman linebackers come in, and 2 of them looked very good in the spring, and the other one ended his spring off on a very high note in the blue gold game. So having that insurance, I think, is big time. And to your point, this is why recruiting the linebacker position over the last couple of years has been such a blessing, man, because it's not only a blessing of just getting more talent in the room. You have also now, I mean, think about this, Brian. Like, we're sitting here saying Prince Kali transfers, they'll be able to, cushion that blow. They'll be okay. And then also you lost Joshua Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka to position changes, and you're still like, we're still good because we've recruited so many talented players at the position. So I think they'll be fine. You need a couple young guys to step up, obviously, but we started seeing in the spring that I think that they're ready to do that, to step up.
This is also why, but what we were just talking about, Ryan, what you said is also why, however, that they have to do well in 24, because now the numbers get a little bit thin. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's a little bit of a concern for me. This is going to do it for this portion, Ryan. We got a mailbag coming up, but before we jump to the mailbag, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Make sure you are signed up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you've signed up for our daily newsletter. You'll find that in the description box below. Merch store. You want like the shirt, right? Got my little green IB Nation hat on. Ryan's got the pullover. The hat that Ryan has on is also something that you can get in the bookstore. We both have, the merch store, both have our IB flags. You can find those in the merch store as well. We have sweats. We have some new hats, some different type of hats. I have like the bucket hat, the big bucket hats go around. Got that. Got a distressed hat on there as well. A lot of good stuff on there. So make sure you check all that out. It's mailbag time, Mr. Robert. So we're going to dive right into these, man. Let's get rocking and rolling, buddy.
Let's do it. From Coleman Smith, who says, "So Brian Driscoll, I read the comments, the commits big board article. Excuse me. I'm just wondering why you didn't grade Aeneas with a higher upside grade."
Well, so a 4-star upside grade, because you had made a comment later here, Ryan. I want to kind of get his follow-up. Comment says, if I get 4.0 is still a top 150 prospect on your scale. Also, I get the speed argument, but he's only going to get stronger in a college strength program. First of all, a 4-star upside grade could also be that of a top 100 guy. So it's 4-star, 5-star, which is like top 25, 4.5 stars, like that top 50-ish, which means you could be like number 60. It's 50 to 60. And then after that, it's 4-star. And then that gets down to about 220, 250. And then if you're outside of the 250 range, then you're a 3.5 star. And so that's pretty much how that works. But I think Aeneas could be a top 100 back. I don't see a guy that, if he maxes out, is a top 50 overall player. I don't see a guy that and I don't actually, his speed doesn't bother me. I don't have any issue with Aeneas' speed. I'm
Speed's
not someone
solid.
who,
Yeah.
I'm not someone who has really I argue with my buddy Tony all the time. Whenever he tells me he doesn't like a player, like he's not high on Michael Gilbert, I know exactly why. He obsesses over speed, right? I'm like, if you don't think Micah Gilbert's, because I told him I had Gilbert's top 150 player, he was shocked. He's like, I'm like, dude, the only thing he lacks is big time speed. That's the only reason you don't think he's a top 150 caliber player. And running back, you can't be like a 4.9, right? But I would imagine
Kyron Williams is one of the best running backs the Nerds had in a couple of years, and he was a 4.65 at the combine.
Right,
like he wasn't a burner at all. I mean, yeah.
So I think Aeneas is faster than Kyron was coming out of high school. To be honest,
he's run electric 4.5 something. At some combines and camps and stuff. So
I'm good. I'm good with him. It's just more of a, if he maxes out, it's just more of the size is really the thing for me. Is he a guy that's going to be a 20 carry per game guy? I don't see that. So like the reason I gave Chris Tyree such a high upside is because I felt like Chris Tyree is a guy that was never going to be a 20 touch guy. But he could do more with 10 do as much with 10 carries as most backs can do at 15 or 20 if you're using him correctly, right? That's how I view his projection coming out of high school. Now, he hasn't been that guy since his freshman year, but we'll see if he can be it this way. But coming out of high school, that's where I had him. Aeneas, to me, doesn't have that type of home run ability that Tyree had, but he also doesn't necessarily show me as a guy that I also view as a 20 touch guy either, or 18 touch. He's more of a nice complimentary. If he's your starter, you're good. He's a good back. He's a Kyron Williams type. Like Kyron Williams isn't a guy that I view as a 4.5 star upside guy, right? Even what he did in Notre Dame, like Ryan, he was a good back, but he was not an elite back by any stretch. And even when you just look at what he did at Notre Dame, I'm not even using the NFL argument because I think the NFL argument is a bad argument to make, because you can be an elite college player and not be considered a high NFL prospect. Would you agree with that? We see that all the time. The guys were great college players, don't get picked very high because the NFL values different things. So I'm not even talking about the fact that Kyron was a 5th round pick, because I actually think him being a 5th round pick was pretty good. I'm talking from the standpoint of, this is a guy that averaged 4.9 and 5.3 yards per carry. And he averaged 5.3 yards per carry behind a really good offensive line in 2020. He was a good back. He wasn't an elite back. He was a top 100-ish caliber player. The way he played in high school, that's what you expect of a top 100 guy. A top 50 guy, and you can respond to this, Ryan, if you disagree, but a guy that's going to have a 4.5 star upside is a guy that's going to look a lot more like Josh Adams than he is Kyron Williams, meaning just like, wow, that's a big time player. Or better, some better examples would be like Jahmyr Gibbs was, I would say, at Georgia Tech was similar to that, but he was probably closer to 5 star. Muhammad Ibrahim, 4.5 star, right? Like really impact player. Blake Corum would be a guy that played like a 4.5 star guy at the next level. That's more of what I expect to be from a 4.5 star guy. And I just don't see that in Aeneas, but that doesn't mean I don't think he's a top 100 caliber player. I think he is.
Right.
It's just, and I'm also trying to be really mindful of just not giving everybody, because I've really felt like last year, boy, man, there's a lot of 4.5 and 5 star guys. Just trying to maybe be a tad pickier a little bit with some of that as I move, because I'm always trying to evolve and say, can we make the system better? Can we be more objective with these things? And I'm just trying to be a little bit pickier. So I actually jumped 2 guys. I dropped their upside grade down. I dropped his upside grade down, and I believe I dropped Peter Jones's upside grade down. Ryan, I believe I'm gonna have to go look at that one again, but I believe I also dropped Peter Jones's upside grade down. Yeah, I did, to a 4.5 to a 4 star, because again, I see him being a top 100 caliber guy when it's all said and done, not Aaron Banks. I see him being more just a good, solid player, where Aaron Banks played his last year. He played like a dude.
That's why he's a 2nd round pick. Yeah.
Right. And also an All-American and all that. I see him being more, I see Peter Jones being more of a Robert Hainsey-ish type of player, just a good, steady player, as opposed to a Liam Eichenberg, All-American, top 50 player. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So still good players. If you're a top 150 player, you're pretty darn good. It's just trying to also be a little bit stingier. In past years, I would have given him a 4.5 star, which is why his original upside grade, Coleman, was a 4.5 star. Same with Peter Jones. I'm just trying to be a little bit more picky. I didn't bring Jack Larson's down to 4-star. I left his a 4.5, Ryan, because I really feel like number one, Jack's going to get a little faster at the next level, but I think people are very much underestimating his route running and how good his hands are. I think Jack Larson in college could be a really, really good tight end if in the right situation. And so I just think his upside is a little bit more impactful at the college level than I do for those other guys. So that answers
Makes
that.
sense.
Thoughts on all that, Ryan?
No, I mean, it makes sense. I think the troubling thing about Aeneas, because I really like Aeneas as a player, but he does play against not the best competition in the world. We've talked about that before, right? So there is like that level of man amongst boys, and you really have to, I think, decipher the physical traits, right? And I think that he has good all-around traits, but does Aeneas have one part of his game that you say is elite? I think that that's where you, I don't want to say fall short, but that's where you kind of have some questions about him. You know, like he catches the ball well. He's got good contact balance. He's got good solid speed for his, his size profile. But is there anything about him that is special from just a physical trait? I think that that's the question mark you have. And again, this is one of those situations where, because I mean, Jack Kaiser was a guy, right, Brian, that played against not great competition, and his numbers were just like, holy smokes, man! Like that guy's going to be an All-American. It's just like, no, he's just going to be a good player. In
good
college,
player. Yeah,
right? Like he's not a star. He's a good football player, though. And I'm not comparing the same situation because I think that Aeneas could be maybe more impactful than that. But I do think that there are some concerns about guys playing against not great competition at times because you can just hide the fact that he's just so much better than the guys he's playing against.
You got to be careful with looking at numbers as an end-all be-all. Like when Audric Estime runs for the numbers he ran for as a senior, that said something to me because when you look at who he's running against and who he's playing against, I mean, I'm actually going to pull him up because his senior year numbers were just ridiculous, Ryan. And when you look at who he did it against, it was like, okay, this is a little nutty. And he had his numbers. He had 1,857 yards that year. This is in 2020. So COVID year. So only played 9 games. He averaged 9.8 yards per carry. And he had 22 touchdowns. But then you look at like who he's playing against. He's playing against Bergen Catholic.
Yeah.
Right. He rushed for 176 yards on 18 carries against Bergen Catholic, a bunch of D1 guys. He runs for 286 yards on 26 carries against Seton Hall Prep, home of Jaden McLean. They said they have D1 guys every year. He goes out and runs for 204 against St. Peter's Prep. Again, another school like Jason and Justin Adamiola's senior year, their entire starting defensive line went on to play Division I football. Right. And he ran for 204 against them. The Hun school, where currently Owen Wafel plays, he had 160 yards on 17 carries. Right. Paramus Catholic, where Rashawn Gary played, he had 201 yards on 14 carries. Don Bosco Prep, 309 yards on 27 carries. Cherokee, he runs for 303 yards on 27 carries. And then this last college game against DePaul Catholic, Ryan, another really good Jersey school, he goes out there and runs for 218 yards on 36 carries. That was his least effective game of the year on a per carry basis, and he was at 6.1 yards per carry. He also caught 14 passes for 185. I mean, so he's doing that against dudes.
Yes.
Right? I mean, dudes. So those numbers matter to me. Amir Carlisle put up stupid numbers against awful football players. And so you had to take the numbers into consideration. But you could still tell that Amir was a very athletic player, very talented player. But you could see he's probably not a running back. And so when he came to Notre Dame, I thought Amir was a much more effective player because he was a more natural position where his skill set fit. But if you watched Amir as a senior in high school, like this guy's a running back because he's just running dudes over and doing all that. And, it was impressive to see. But the thing for me with Aeneas, Ryan, is like Jack Kaiser's a great example. I gave Jack a 4.5 star upside grade. If I graded Jack the way that I do now, a little pickier, I would not have. Right. So it's just about always trying to alter the system to just be for a guy to be a 5-star, he's got to really be a big time. For a guy to have a 4.5-star upside grade, he has to have a chance to be a really difference maker type of player, right? Like Adi Takumba Ogundiji at his peak at Notre Dame was a 4-star top 100 to 50 to 100 caliber guy, in my opinion, his senior year. Khalid Kareem, more 4.5-star. He was more of a difference maker to me. Dalen Hayes, 4-star. Julian Aguara, 4-star, because there was not the consistency. Isaiah Foskey, 5-star last year in 2021, 4.5-star this year, even with all the issues, was still a really good football player. So I'm trying to be a little bit more picky with some of those as well. And so you may look at Aeneas and say, well, he had a 4-star, but you gave this other guy a 4.5-star. Fair, but that was on a different evaluation process. I'm always trying to update it and be more, is this really the best way we're doing it? Is it really giving us the most, is it really giving people the most balanced, or where they really understand what a guy can be, as opposed to just giving every kid that signs at Notre Dame a 4.5-star upside grade? So I'm just trying to be more not objective, because I always feel like I've been objective, but just being a little bit more picky with some of those higher grades is really where I'm coming from. So when I give Isaiah Canyon a 5-star upside grade, keep in mind that's me doing it with a more picky evaluation in mind, right? And I don't want to go back and change grades for guys, because I feel like that's going to seem like I'm retroactively changing because the guy didn't pan out. So that's why I leave the grades where they are. But some of the guys I had ranked higher, I would not have ranked them as where I have it, as I've evolved the grading system. Because the other thing too, Ryan, is the upside grade is gut. The current grade is literally based off a point system, right? So there's a little bit of both of that. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. So just keep that in mind, that Aeneas having a 4-star upside grade is because I view him as a guy that could be a top 100 football player when it's all said and done. And he's pretty close now. I think I have him as top 200 now. And that's just because I just want to see him develop as a senior, and the size is still a little bit of a question for me as far as can he be an every down guy. There's still some of those questions, but make no mistake, I think Aeneas Williams is a really good football player. Really good football player. And being a 4-star upside grade is no insult at all.
No.
At all. All right, here we go.
From Rob Osgood, who says offensive line recruiting. Do you think the new coach, some recruits are wanting to see how things play out during the season? With Harry Heastan, they knew what they were getting. Just a thought. Somewhat, Rob. I mean, look, this is where I am with this kind of conversation, right? Because people knew that Notre Dame had a big time reputation as developing offensive linemen, right? They knew that, but they still know that. I think the thing with Harry Heastan was that Harry, I think, could really sell it, right? And was a good evaluator of talent. And when Harry Heastan got in a room with you, I really think that sold it not only to the players, but to the parents as well, because then he could kind of talk about his past and his, the reputation he built. Because we talked about this last year, Brian. I remember when I was talking to like Samson Okunlola, and Samson Okunlola didn't really know anything about Harry Heastan. He was just like, I know he's a good coach, but like I didn't know like I don't know the reputation quite as well, obviously. So I don't really think it's the reputation as much from these guys. I do think that it's more about there's a little bit of a transitional period that's happened here, right? Where it's like Joe Rudolph comes in. He has to help build the board in his own image and guys that he likes. And I think that there were some evaluations that we might not agree with, but we also have to give this a little bit of time, right? Like we forget that this is like still like kind of new in the process. And at the end of it, if Joe Rudolph is able to still get Gerby Lambert and get one of Styles Prescott or Grant Bricks or somebody else that we consider a good football player, then you feel pretty good about offensive line recruiting going forward. I just think that there was a little bit of, I've been building a relationship with Coach Heastan. I've been talking to him for months, and then now there's a new coach that comes in. And that's kind of where I think that there's just a little bit of a marinating period to a degree, right? Like a relationship building period, because I think that really matters for offensive linemen, man. It's not the glitz and the glam. It's the trust in the people that are around you every single day and the people that are developing you. So I just think this was a process that needs to take place a little bit. I have not hit like I haven't hit the bell that's like, oh my God, I am panicking, right? But like, there's just you're watching because you're interested, and there's just been a couple evaluations that maybe you don't agree with, but I still think things are going to end up being fine. There's just a transition period that's happened right now.
Right. There's a difference between being concerned and the panic, like the fire alarm has been pulled, right? We're not there yet. It's just, we'll see. We'll see. And we're trying to give them the time to, because to me, we could sit here and crush them right now. Oh, it was a terrible evaluation of Caleb Brewer and this, that, and the other, and they're not getting this guy, not getting that guy. It's May 3rd, right? Well, how about we wait until we get a little closer to signing day before, because like you said, right, it could all, if they get Gary Lambert and either Styles Prescott or Grant Bricks or something like that, good. I can disagree with him about the Caleb Brewer pickup, but it's not like I think Anthony Knapp is a bum, and we'll see if he ends up being right or not. There's not the same track record there, in my opinion, that Harry Hiestand had, but we'll see how he does at Notre Dame. So I think that's a very fair take. And, I just, like you said, concerned, but not ready to hit the panic button at this point in time.
Not panicked yet. Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to read this one, Ryan. This is from Insured by Big, our LSU fan in the chat. He says, complete. We haven't seen Frank McCaffrey recently. Have you noticed that? I haven't seen Frank in the chat. So hope the Frank's back, but is okay. So Insured by Big, our other LSU fan, which we appreciate you being, says completely off topic. Sorry, but Brian, I'm happy to announce that Brian Poling is officially no longer on LSU staff. Kelly was finally able to pull the trigger. By the way, Notre Dame's recruiting is on fire. He's definitely on fire. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, if you don't know what he's referring to, so Brian Poling was reassigned to an off the field coaching job a little Mater in Ohio. So he is officially gone from LSU, and LSU is going to be better for it from a coaching standpoint. Everyone knows I'm not the biggest Brian Poling fan in the world. And what this move guarantees is there's no chance I'll ever be employed by John Carroll if I ever decided to want to get back into coaching. I'm pretty sure that will never happen. But LSU is going to be better off for it. I don't know who they hired, but it can't be a downgrade.
But I heard from LSU media last year that Brian Poling was a really good special teams coach. I don't know what you're talking about, man.
Yeah, that was one of the funniest takes of that whole exchange. I'm like, okay, now I know you're not serious. Now I know you're just some homer saying whatever Brian Kelly tells you to say. Like you're not.
Look at his resume, man. He was a head coach at one point. Sure,
an unsuccessful one, by the way. I might add. All right, let's get to some more here, Ryan. I'm going to read this. I want you to answer first. This is from Bailey Brad. He says, do you have a Notre Dame football hot take? If you do, what is it? So can we define what a hot take is, first of all, just to make sure we're on the same page of what a hot take is?
Something that people mostly don't agree with. So something that's a little controversial is how I would phrase a hot take. I don't know if I have one, though, that just came to mind. I mean, okay. I mean, a Notre Dame hot take for people outside of Notre Dame lands, right?
Yes.
Other media and fans would be that I think Notre Dame is a sleeping giant if they win one national championship, and they could easily go from one championship to being one of the premier colleges in college football as far as perennial contender every single year, because I think that will unlock the recruiting aspect of everything. I think it will make Notre Dame appeal even higher because the brand is already strong as far as the legacy and the tradition that it brings. And I really think they're one big season away from being on the course of a Alabama, Georgia, like that type of brand. Like I really think that they could extend to that type of heights if they have just one championship level season. I really do.
That's a great hot take, and I agree with it, Ryan. I want to add something.
Yep.
I think what a lot of people that are saying that Notre Dame can't compete in the NIL era are incredibly misguided for two reasons. Number one, the wrong assumption that every big-time kid wants an immediate payout or he's not going. There are plenty of those. But as we saw last year, there's a lot of really talented players, including one kid that we know turned down a 7-figure offer to sign with Notre Dame. Yes. Several other kids that turned down significant six-figure offers to come to Notre Dame. And we're talking about guys that you and I graded as top 100 players, right? Yep. There's a wrong assumption that all these kids are just looking for this right now. I think it's very misguided.
Yep.
That doesn't mean that kids won't take it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're only going to a school because of that. Now, Jaden Rashada was clearly just going to go to whoever gave him the biggest number. I mean, that there are kids like that.
Yep.
But there's also CJ Cars. who aren't. Obviously, NIL was very important for Dante's father. But then there's other guys where it's not as big of a deal. Austin Novosad didn't go to Oregon, I don't think, because he got a big payout. At least not that I know of. Chris Vizina didn't go to Clemson because he got a big payout. Arch Manning didn't go to Texas because he got a big payout. There's plenty of kids that go because they want to be developed, because there's a lot of big-time players that understand, yeah, this NIL stuff is good, but if I don't go somewhere that's going to develop me, then this is all it's ever going to be. Most of these kids, and this is the thing about Keon Keeley that I don't think people are giving Keon enough credit for. Keon's thing is, yeah, get some NIL money, but I want to get the real big money, which comes from being a top 10 NFL draft pick. Who would you rather be, Will Anderson or Isaiah Foskey right now? Right? I mean, we're talking, that's probably tens of millions of dollars difference between pick number 3 and pick number 40, right?
Easy. Yeah, easy.
And so that's where it comes from, because Keon understands, I'm thinking big picture here. And everybody think the only way you can think big picture is to look at Notre Dame and the degree. That's part of it, but if you're a big-time player, there's more to it. So I think that's misguided, because if Notre Dame had a track record of championships and producing first-round picks at his position, I think Keon Keeley right now is a guy that you and I are talking about how important he's going to be for Notre Dame's defense this year, flat out. And I don't care what anybody offered him NIL, because Keon is a really sharp kid that understands this, thinking way beyond just this immediate, here's a basket, a bag of cash. There's a lot of kids like
McDonald's bag of cash.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Where I think they're so misguided, Ryan, is because I think what you just said could not be true before NIL. They would have been a team that were just like they were in the 80s. You win a title, but you don't win a bunch of them. Here's where people are missing the boat. Notre Dame is an attractive place. They have plenty of players making really good money.
Yeah,
that's coming off of a 9-4 season. Not a team that's been a real national title contender. Let Notre Dame win a title. Let Notre Dame go to the championship game and play well. And all of a sudden, more and more money starts pouring into Notre Dame, and more of their kids are desirable for those big deals that you get in college. Because that's where the real money is the deals you get throughout your 4 years at a place, then also get in the NFL. And to your point, Ryan, Notre Dame can now compete with these schools where they can actually give money, where before you're getting $100,000, $200,000 from Alabama under the table, and you're getting nothing from Notre Dame.
Right.
Now, we can't offer you a guaranteed upfront money, but what I can tell you is Michael Mayer did this, Kyle Hamilton did this, Isaiah Foskey had his own freaking clothing line, that made him this. And that's kind of what you can point to. So that actually gets Notre Dame in the game. You and I know of kids who said, hey, I'm not going to get as much upfront money, but Notre Dame's doing this, this, and this. Now, Notre Dame's not anywhere close to where they need to be, NIL-wise. Not even close, but it's still having an impact. And if Notre Dame is going to be serious, they need to start doing more. But even if they don't do more, if Notre Dame goes out this year and wins a title, to your point, money's going to pour into this program, and there's not a dang thing that the Notre Dame administration can do about it, even if they wanted to stop it, because it's legal.
Yep.
Schools wanted to do advertising with, imagine if Tobias Merriweather goes out there, that he's already got NIL deals, guys. He's already got multiple NIL deals, and he's caught one freaking pass in his career, and he's got NIL deals. Imagine if Tobias is the best receiver on a team that wins a championship. I mean, seriously, you don't think he's going to be a millionaire by the end of next year? Of course he is. At Notre Dame. That puts Notre Dame in a different universe now, Ryan, where a lot of these kids, like the Elijah Rushings, like the Ryan Wingos, who we can have a different conversation about Ryan Wingo, but who understands, like, I want to go somewhere. Yeah, NIL is important, but I want to go somewhere going to get developed. Once Notre Dame kicks that door down, if they are able to kick that door down, which to me is a lot like what Clemson did, just get to the title game and be competitive. And that's going to get you some guys you weren't getting before.
Yeah.
So to me, the money, but in 88, there was no money coming into those players. Right? There just wasn't. They were recruiting because it's still freaking Notre Dame. It's still freaking Notre Dame now. If they want a title being competitive, it's still Notre Dame. Now the stuff that sells even more, because now Alabama has nothing on Notre Dame to be able to say, well, yeah, but we won 6. But yeah, man, you haven't won one since 2020, and Notre Dame just won one, right?
Yep.
Because what's going to happen? You're going to see guys get overdrafted. like it happens at Georgia and Alabama all the time, right? That's going to happen to Notre Dame if that kicks into place. There's a lot of LSU kids off that 2019 team that got overdrafted too, Ryan. Now, there was the stars. I mean, Jamar Chase has been legit, Justin Jefferson, Joe Burrow, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire hasn't played like a first-round running back. Lloyd Cushenberry's been a little bit disappointing as a third-round pick, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's some guys that got drafted a little bit higher than they probably should have because they were part of an elite team. So you'll see some guys get overdrafted, not all. Some guys are Joe will be deserved to be a top 5 pick at that point in time. So when I look at this, Ryan, I think your hot take is spot on because they're NIL is going to end up being a reason for that if Notre Dame kicks that door down, and that's where people are missing the boat. This assumption that every kid just wants upfront money. Some do, yeah, some do,
sure,
but a lot don't. If you can prove to them that you turn down this $1.5 million to take $200,000 now, but look at our track record of doing this down here, right? And there's going to be big time players going to be all about that, and they're going to understand. And that's why, to your point, Ryan, I do think if Notre Dame's able to kick that door down, they become a juggernaut because now you have nothing to recruit against them. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And that would make them scary. Whereas some of the things would still exist. If NIL wasn't a thing, some of those things would still exist. Hey, man, you're going to go there and go to school and it's going to cost you this and all that for 4 years, where I'm going to give you $200,000 right now. Right? Notre Dame can do nothing. Now Notre Dame can give you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Kids are going to, Notre Dame right now, from what I'm understanding, are going to make $100,000 in their careers if they never play a snap. Just from the collective. Over the course of 4 years, we'll make $100,000 off the collective just by not doing a dang thing except showing up at some community service events. That's it. Now, is that enough? Probably not. Needs to get better. But think about that. The guys that are playing are doing something. So I'm with you. My hot take was going to be similar, Ryan. It was going to be more specific to this year. I think Notre Dame has one of the 5 best rosters in college football in 2023. That's my hot take. And I'll keep it simple because I just had all that. But, yeah, that's my hot take. I know people will disagree with that, but I think they have one of the 5 best rosters. If you look top to bottom, I think they're one of the 5 best rosters. And we'll see if that's accurate or not. But that's my hot take. And it's not a hot take just to create – I believe it. Right. But I also know that it's not a lot of Notre Dame fans don't believe that, in my opinion. There's a lot of Notre Dame fans that don't believe that Notre Dame has a top 5 roster. A lot, including a lot in our chat. And that's fine. I'm not criticizing those people, but I disagree. I'm going to read this next couple, Ryan, or this next one because it's more for you. Oh, shoot. I just unstarred it. So I'll go back to it. It was basically the status. I can't remember who asked it, but the status was what's the latest with Sammy Brown, linebacker from Georgia?
I mean, we talked about this a ton. So Notre Dame got off to a good start with Sammy, and they actually got him on campus last summer, which was great. You know, following obviously his big time going into his junior year, which he had a big time junior year. I mean, he's one of the more impressive athletes in the 2024 class overall, not just at linebacker, just in general. I mean, that kid's like a 10-600 meter runner as a linebacker. Like, he's just a fantastic player out of Jefferson High School in Georgia. But I mean, the point blank is it on this one. And I know people are going to say something because I just said point blank, and apparently I say that all the time. So funny. But Sammy Brown, it's just he was always going to be hard. He was always going to get hard to get out of the South, man. Like, ultimately, I think it's going to be Georgia or it's going to be Clemson. Like, those are the 2 teams that seem to kind of have risen to the top for a guy like Sammy. Notre Dame did a really good job early on, a commendable job early on, because I don't think that that's a guy that you're going to traditionally attract, obviously, at this point. But Notre Dame did a tremendous job early on with Sammy. It was just Sammy Brown was always going to get tough to get out of the South, man. Like, they're just point, I almost said point blank again. It's just the end all be all, the be all end all. I know everyone loves some of the lingo here, right? But I just think that he was always going to be a tough pull, and he's going to end up somewhere in the South.
Agree. Let's get to the next one, Ryan. Sorry for not giving credit to whoever asked that question. Instead of popping it in here, I accidentally hit the star, which takes it out of the star area, and I didn't know where it was. All right, let's go here. John A1 asks, Ryan, I'll leave this up to you. Is Carter Nelson is Carter Nelson now a take no matter when he makes a decision?
We've talked about the tight end situation, John. I think that Notre Dame is okay with staying at 1, but like that could always change depending on how numbers shake out or how this class shakes out. So I wouldn't say he's necessarily a take no matter what, because there is a situation where they might just take one tight end, right? So in that situation, he would not be a take no matter what. I can answer it from my perspective is that Carter Nelson, I think, is a very unique player and a unique situation, because I actually think that Carter Nelson could play defense if you needed him to. Like, I think that kid could play Rover. I think he could play Will. I think he might even grow into a Viper down the line. So would he be a take for me? Yes, he'd be a take 100% for me. I would get him in this class some way, somehow, whether it's as a tight end or whether it's as an athlete that could potentially play defense, could be a tight end. I would try to make the fit happen. What Notre Dame, I think that's a wrestling conversation that's going to happen, because tight end is a spot that Notre Dame might be okay with just taking one because of how numbers are going to fall out. So I think I would try to make it work, but I just don't know if Notre Dame is going to be able to. So that's kind of where we are.
Agree. Not sure if they will, but I'd have a hard time saying no to him. Even much more so than Jaden Riddell, in my opinion, to be honest with you. As I said before, Jaden Riddell is the better player right now. Carter Nelson has the higher ceiling. And if it comes down to it, I'm almost always going to bet on the higher ceiling.
And Carter might be able to play a couple different spots potentially, which is just he's just a unique athlete, man. He's just very unique.
Yep. Real quick from John Klimek, any updates on Micah Bell? I'm excited to see him on the field. I mean, he's just putting up great numbers in track again. He's ran a couple 10-4s already. The way track goes, if I know this for sprinting, I don't know this about throws, Ryan, but for sprinting, you usually build up your numbers as you go through the year, and your best times are usually later in the year, or if you're on a fast. I mean, because not every track is the same. Some tracks are faster than others, but his times have been progressively getting better and better. I think he's just coming fresh off of a 10-4-1 recently an event, so he's going well. He's healthy, and he'll be ready to go. Will he be a guy that can help out as a freshman? I don't know. But
that usually is a typical thing in track and field in general, is that they call it championship season when you get to state. Well, you get to the regionals and then states and then meet of champions is what we had in Jersey as far as like the elite of the elite. You want to peak at the right times. Like, you don't want to throw your 180-foot discus throw in the first couple meets of the season and then barely peak the 150s the rest of the year, right? Like, you want to peak at the right times 100%.
Well, look at last year, Ryan. He set his personal record in the 100, 200, triple jump, and long jump at the same event, and it was the state final championship match, right? Because that's what you're building towards. And
you're also competing against the best. So, like, it's like, I'm going to run a little faster today because I have to get out of the gate a little quicker. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's what always happens.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. It's that combination of it, no doubt. All right, here we go.
From Katie Keevers. Katie says, why don't they just let these high school kids sign whenever they want?
I understand why people might have that notion, but the abuse that would happen with coaches, if they could do that, would be unreal. Meaning coaches would manipulate kids and hey, if you don't sign it now, we're pulling it. There'd be so much dirty stuff going on of coaches manipulating kids to try to convince them to sign before they take other visits or whatever. It would get bad. It would be ugly. It'd be really ugly. And so what this allows them to do is you can't use a signature to manipulate a kid into signing with your school. You get some kid to sign a waiver. He thinks it's a waiver, and in reality, it's a letter of intent. Like, there would be somebody that would do that because coaches a lot of places are just really shady when it comes to that stuff. But it would turn into abuse for players where they basically, they basically have to. I mean, it's a protection for the kids, honestly, Katie, is really what it boils down to for me. It really is. It really is.
I mean, because coaches try to force players to make verbal commitments all the time, right? And it's like verbal, you could change so quickly. I mean, they'd be forcing these kids to sign on the dot line as quick as possible.
Now, here's what I would say. I think what would be helpful is if they had a true early signing period, because the early signing period now is just the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. It's just dumb. Yep. It's like a month and a half before the normal one, right? That's it. If you wanted to have a real early signing period, make it July 31st. So kids can take their summer visits. Now they can take unlimited visits. Now they can take as many freaking officials that they want. If they want to take an official visit every single day of the month of June, they could do that, which is be stupid, but they could. So, let them go through the whole process of visiting. If they know where they want to, like CJ Card knows where he wants to go, and he wants to get it over with before his senior year so he can focus on his senior year and not have to worry about coaches calling him all this other kind of crap. Why can't he sign on July 31st? Well, why? To me, that would be a real signing. But who doesn't want that? Coaches don't want that. Why? Because they don't want kids signed that early. They want all these kids to still be on the market so they can go get them later. Yep. Right. And so if they wanted this early signing period that was truly best for young people, it would be in July, not December. Right now, because again, you can get out of an NIL if a coach leaves. It's not like you can't get out of it, especially nowadays. It's easy to get out of it. But at least that way, the kids that don't can keep schools from calling them. Hey, man, look, what you're doing is illegal. Stop calling me or I'm going to report you to the NCAA. Right? It's simple as that. But they're not going to do that because
they are not.
NCAA still protects the schools. The NCAA doesn't protect players. Nothing the NCAA has done in the last 5 years of all this portal crap, it's not meant for the players. It's not meant to be better for the players at all. It's meant to basically remove from them any responsibility for what the game is turning into. And every move they do make, like this legislation that they're proposing for NIL stuff, it's not meant to make it a process that protects both sides. It's meant to process to protect the schools. Because at the end of the day, the schools are concerned that a lot of the NIL money is now going to the players and not to the school. Yep. So they're going to try to make rules that are very pro-school, and then that's going to end up causing this big court fight, blah, 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 as opposed to, hey, let's try to truly find a system that works for both of us. They don't care about that, which is why they're an absolute failure of an institution. An absolute failure.
They are?
Yep. All right.
From Jay, if Notre Dame lands Malachi Williams, Justin Scott, and Elijah Rushing, talk about closing the gap. Yes.
Yeah. That's not closing the gap. That's erasing the gap.
Yes.
If they got all three of those, Ryan, like think about that. If they got all three of those kids, which I just don't see it's going to happen. Don't see it happening at all.
But if you get two out of three, it's still pretty dang good.
Oh my! Honestly, if you get two of those three, it's the same thing. You have closed the gap in a big, big way. On top of what you got last year and the year before, you got Boubacar and Armel and Brennan Vernon and Devin Houston last year, which is a really good top 10 to 15 caliber defensive line. The year before that, now who's playing? You got Tyson Ford, Aiden Gobira, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka. You're now 3 years in a row of recruiting the defensive line really well. And this might be your best class of all of them. Yeah, that'd be big time.
The best part about that, too, is in this hypothetical, Jay, if you got Malachi Williams and Elijah Rushing, you loaded up on strong side defensive ends in 2023. That's two Viper types. And I'm not hiding it, man. Malachi Williams, I think, has some of the highest upside of any defensive player in 2024. I truly do, man. He is so twitchy, so long. There's just so much room there, man. And Elijah Rushing's a elite player as well.
Yep. They're all those kids are 5-star upside guys.
Yeah.
I have said this, Ryan. I think Malachi Williams has as high of a ceiling as any defensive lineman in the country. You're taking a step further and saying any defensive player, and I wouldn't necessarily push back against you on that, to be honest with you. And that's saying something when you consider the guys on the board. That would be – and honestly, if you were to take out Malachi and put in Logan Thomas, or take out Elijah Rushing and put in Logan Thomas, I'd still say that's a freaking heck of a defensive line class.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
It really, really is. That's a really talented group of guys.
Especially because Logan's also a Viper, so he meets a need that you didn't hit in 2023 as well.
And he's more of a pure Viper, meaning he's a guy you can drop into coverage. He's more of a guy that can – right. He's more of a hybrid Viper than an Isaiah Foskey Viper. So he would bring something completely different to the table. The other thing, too, I was going to say is Malachi and Elijah Rushing. I would not have said this before this blue gold game when we saw Malachi, but those are two guys also, especially Elijah, that have potential to be more of a field end as well. Not the power end that they had in the past, but a field end where you're using him more to rush the quarterback and do different things, which is where I think Notre Dame would eventually like to get with that position.
Sure.
So that'll be very, very interesting. Very interesting. Ryan, have you watched the new kid from at safety that they offered? I have not. That happened like right before the show. I have not watched this film. I know we've been asked
I
about it a
watched a
couple
little
times.
tiny bit. I mean, he's an explosive kid, but he I haven't watched enough to have a true opinion yet.
Yeah, we will. So Eric Santini and a couple others have asked about that. We'll get to that. Obviously, that happened kind of right before the show, so we didn't get a chance to really to dive into that a ton. But we will. We'll look at it.
From Raymond Harton says, "Do you see Charles Jagasaw as a left tackle? Sorry if I missed it." I think he could. I think he could.
Agree. Yeah. Am I guaranteed that that's his best position? No. I still think right tackle is more of a power player's his best position. But could he play? I didn't think Mike McGlinchey was a true left tackle either. Like thinking his best position. Mike McGlinchey's best position was always right tackle. He's still a pretty darn good left tackle for Notre Dame in 2016 and 2017, right? I mean, so. I could see Charles being in a similar situation where he ends up being a left tackle because he just is the best guy for that job. And maybe even if it's not his true position, he'd still be really good at it. That's just kind of how good he is. Would you agree with that assessment, Ryan?
Yeah.
And then
my opinion on Charles changed a lot as a senior, though. It really did, because I thought he looked really comfortable as a left tackle as a senior, man. I thought he really did. So I think he could play left. I think he could certainly play right. And I still think he could be a dominant inside player, though. Like I still do, man. Like I think he could be a dominant player at potentially 3 to 4 spots. Like that's how good I think Charles Jagasaw is.
I would not have said that, Ryan. I agree with everything you just said. I would not have agreed with that after his junior film.
Yeah.
I loved him as a junior, but it was like he's a power right tackle guard. I mean, he just was a different athlete. He completely changed his game as a senior. No,
and I knew he was big, but seeing him down in San Antonio when he was out there, I'm like, oh, this dude's a different level of big, man. Like he's a big cat. He's a big cat.
Yep. No doubt.
We had a super chat from Chief Brody. Chief, thank you so much. I'm actually not sure how it works, but does Marcus Freeman get to have any input on some stylistic uniform changes? I think pants and helmets changes in Brian Kelly's second year.
I mean, he has some, sure. I mean, I think it's not so much like he's sitting there on his like little design studio in the office, like, creating the jerseys, but something like, hey, look, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we green jerseys for this? Can we change? I think there's going to be some say on that. I do.
Yeah.
There's only so much he doesn't have like editorial control, so to speak, right? As the head coach, football coach, but yeah, he has input.
To sign off on things and suggestions, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if they were smart, they would give him a lot of that, but we'll see.
I mean, I want to know how much input he has on some of these hoodies I see him wearing, man. They're pretty dope, right? A lot of that.
Seriously. They should. Oh boy. Yeah, I got some ideas on that. Notre Dame, hit me up. I got some ideas on how y'all can either make a lot of money or raise a lot of money for charity if you want to. Hit me up. All right, let's move on.
From Irishman 7114. Given Kennedy Urlacher's genes, his size, and his dad blowing up in college, would Notre Dame look at taking 3 more safety prospects, thinking that Urlacher may be ultimately becoming a will linebacker or a rover?
I just don't see that. I mean, and I get where people are coming from. I can't speak to what his dad looked like in high school because I didn't know who the heck he was until he was like a junior in college at New Mexico and he'd already blown up. But when I look at Kennedy Urlacher photo, I don't see a guy that's eventually going to be 6'3", 230.
Yeah,
I don't see it. I see a guy that's a safety. And here's the deal. If he does outgrow the position, you're not fixing that in this class. You're fixing that in 25, 26, and 27 classes. So I just don't think that's a position, a change that I know fans talk about it a lot. I get it, but it's just not for me. It's just not where I see him being, in my opinion.
I wouldn't be shocked if he's a rover eventually, but it's not a size thing as much as like if he's a 6 foot, 200 pounds safety though, and you feel good about your safety conversation, like you get 3 safeties on the field and one's a de facto rover. You know what I mean? Like it's
right, but see, I don't count that as a rover. That's more of a nickel in that situation. Like when I think rover, it's because what do the rovers do right now for Notre Dame, right? They line up inside in the box, they play will, they come off the edge, and I see him being more of a true 4-2-5 type of rover. Yes, I agree with that, but that's where it's more of a defensive back, but not the way that Notre Dame has used the rover, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But let's also keep in mind too, to your point though, that Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was like 6'1", 210 pounds when he played rover at Notre Dame. and they used it much differently than how they used Drew Tranquil. So depending on the skill set, you can use it differently. To your point, it would result in them using it differently. But it's more as a defensive back as opposed to a linebacker. And I want to see what he can do at safety first. And if he can't stick at safety, then they can fix that in the 25, 26, and 27 classes, not in this class. Because here's the thing, you can't take 3 more in case it happens, but then what if it doesn't?
Right.
Now you got
overpopulated.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, let's get down to so Chill 2177. I don't know the answer to this, Chill. He says, what players who left have an undergrad degree? I don't know the answer to that question, because any of them that would are going to get it after this semester.
Right.
Or into the summer. So I'm honestly not sure on that, Chill. I'm going to try to find that out.
I hope most of them, because that would be a shame if they,
Yeah, I hope so, but I don't think that they would be, because they're going into their junior years, right? Like all the guys that left are going into their junior years, which means they would have had to got degrees in 2 years, which to me, I don't see as being possible. Even as early enrollees, I don't see that as being possible. I think they could have got it in December, maybe with some summer school, but that's just my opinion. Chill. I don't know that answer for a fact. I'll try and figure that one out.
You're probably right. 2 years is a very short amount of time to
at Notre Dame, especially. Yeah.
The only guy I remember doing that was, you remember Darnay Holmes that went to UCLA?
Oh, yeah.
He graduated in like 2 years. It was insane.
Wow. Yeah. It's impressive. Well, I would imagine he had a bunch of high school credits that transferred over too, and Notre Dame doesn't usually take a lot of those.
Yeah, I know he was a really good student too, coming out of high school, apparently. So not totally shocking. From Katie Keevers, do you guys think it's interesting that Chris Tyree struggled to get touches last year, but right away, this new offensive staff said we need to put Tyree in a position to get the football more?
I wouldn't call it interesting as much as it's frustrating, because this is what we said needed to happen last year. And like, I understand it. Coach Reese had an offense that he wanted to run.
Yes.
And his offense is geared more towards the precision, making calls to get guys open and stuff like that, as opposed to, let's just get this guy to flipping football. You know what I mean? And I understand that it was frustrating because my style is different, but it was frustrating, but I'm just glad that this staff has expressed doing it. Now, here's the thing. They've expressed it. We saw it in the spring, but now we got to see them go do it in games. It's easy to do things in March and April, but are you still doing this in August and September and October, November? That's going to be a different question mark, or a different question, I should say. So I want to see them do it in the games. But yes, if they continue to do what they say that they want to do and what we've seen in practice, and that is find ways to get Chris Tyree the ball within a framework of he's on the field with the running backs, yes, I'll be very excited about that. And it'll be kind of a bit of an about time type of mindset. I mean, I get why they didn't do it in 2021. He was banged up a lot of that year. But 2022, they should have done more. And when they used him that way, Ryan, it was impactful. Not even just when he was getting the ball, but how it impacted other guys on the field.
Well, and last year we were begging for more 21 personnel, right? So what's one way to make it 21 personnel? Put him at wide receiver, right? So there we go.
Yep. Yeah.
Irish Chi-Town says, Brian, could you see Audric Estime having feature back carries by the end of the season?
Well, I think he's going to be the feature back from day one. I think he's going to be a feature back carries in every big game that they have. My whole thing is I don't care who you are or what you look like. I want to see a situation where when you're playing Navy, when you're playing Tennessee State, when you're playing Central Michigan, one or two of the ACC schools that you just whoop for whatever reason, I want to see him get 10 touches and 120 yards and be out at halftime. I mean, that's really what I want to see. Yeah. Save him for bigger games, and then let him get the 23 touches against Ohio State or USC or Clemson. That's what I care more about. So, but yeah, I would hope that every big game and maybe NC State's a game he needs to have 20, right? But then you're surrounding with Tennessee State and Central Michigan where he's not getting anything close to that, and that's how you keep him fresh, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Well, they need him to now even more, especially early in this. I mean, early in the season, honestly, more than later in the season, because later in the season, you'll have guys that are probably rounded into form a little bit as younger players. From Tyler Smith, who says, I was watching Lucky Lefty podcast yesterday, and Malik said the teams to hit 41st will win that game. What do you guys think of the matchup for Notre Dame versus Clemson?
I mean, it's a little early yet to really dive into it too much. I'd be surprised if it was that kind of game, to be honest with you.
I mean, what are we just projecting? Garrett Riley's going to open everything up, and he's just going to be that type of guy. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Also, I think that's like underselling both sides of the defense.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was looking at it, Ryan. I have a hard time believing both of these teams, because like Notre Dame scored 35 on them last year, but they blocked a punt. They returned a touchdown. They returned an interception for a touchdown, and then another interception got them the ball at like the 12 going in. So it's and then the closest we saw, I mean, Clemson was missing 3 starters off their defense. Yeah. They both got into the 40s in double overtime. It was 33-33, and that was a high scoring game. So I'd be a little surprised I could say 30, like first team to 30 wins. I would say that's more
30 is
likely.
A good number.
Yeah.
I mean 40 on both sides, because
now look, the first team to 40 may win, Ryan, but it means it's probably going to be a blowout, not
it'd be like shootout. 40 something to 20 or something like that, right? Yeah.
Right.
Well, I just think I know that Clemson lost a lot of defensive players this offseason, but like they still got some guys coming back, right? I mean, like Tyler Davis is back, Rook is back, Barrett Carter's going to be a year older. Like they're going to be all right, man. What? Is that what you laughed at?
I was waiting on it. I was like, so you just did what I did with the kid from Ohio State. I just call him JT, right? I don't even try to mess that one up.
Rook, man. I need to learn how to say his last name at some point, probably. But
I think it's really a row. I really do think that let me just pull up the Clemson because it's definitely spelled that way.
You sound like Scooby-Doo, man.
Yeah. So Clemson has this, or Virginia, University of Virginia, I think is the team that has this. But they have a thing where on every kid's bio page, they have a proper pronunciation of his name.
Which is great.
It's phenomenal. Yeah. But it does not look like Clemson has that on theirs. So not going to, I'm not going to even guess at it. But Rook, we know who he's talking about, the big kid from Michigan. So, no, I don't think Clemson's going to be a great defense this year, but they're going to be good.
Yeah.
They're not going to be what they used to be. It's not going to be a vintage. But exactly. I mean, they're going to have some good players stepping into spots. Barrett Carter's going to be a good player. Jeremiah Trotter's a good player. Those guys are getting a little bit too much preseason hype. I've seen both of them like on preseason first team All-American lists. Like, hold on a second. Maybe Barrett Carter, but Jeremiah Trotter.
I think Trotter's a little bit overrated.
Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Exactly. But still good football players. Their secondary has been a hot mess in recent years, but they have recruited it well the last couple of years, recruited it better, I should say, the last couple of years. But the question is, can they coach it? That's a little bit of a bigger question for me. I'm still not sold on their I'm still not sold on the defensive coordinator, but he's not terrible. He's just not great, in my opinion.
I'm going to read this one. Scooby-Doo in my mind. Now.
Yeah, I know, right? Ryan, I'm going to read this one because I want to get your thoughts on it first. From Andrew Burke. Brian and Ryan, over-under on Notre Dame having more than over-under on Notre Dame's players getting drafted next year is 5.5. So over-under 5.5 players picked. Ryan, you going over or under?
I am going with, let me think. Logan Diggs does change this equation a little bit because you thought at least one running back would be in the class, right? So now I'm still projecting that probably Audric will most likely be in the draft.
I actually thought they were going to have 2. I really thought they were going to have 2 backs drafted next year. Possible. One higher than the other, obviously.
I'm working this through my mind. So offensive tackle, you'll have one of them at least, right? So you'll probably have Joe Waltz. You'll probably have Audric Estime. Defensively, Cam Hart will get drafted, even with the medicals. There's no doubt about it. Defensively, I think that if Riley Mills comes out, he is going to get drafted just based upon traits, if nothing else. Then you're talking about Javonte Jean-Baptiste as a potential draft pick. You're talking about offensively, if one of the wide receivers have a breakout. I'm going to say over on that one. I'm going to say over, but I think I would have been more over if Logan Diggs was still in the conversation.
Yeah, because here's the thing too, Ryan. If Notre Dame's going to be the team that you and I think they're going to be this year,
Yep.
There's going to have to be some draft eligible players that maybe we aren't projecting now that really step up and play well.
I've got
Right. So, I
Sam
mean,
Hartman
obviously,
too in my talk.
yeah,
So
Joe Alt, Sam Hartman, Audric Estime are guys that I see being drafted. Cam Hart, that's 4 easy ones right there. Then it comes down to, okay, does Riley Mills have a breakout and then leave? I think does Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a guy that I'm very curious to see. He's a guy that I could see get drafted next year if he does what, Ryan, you were talking about earlier. If he's that kind of guy, he's a 6'5 plus, 250-pound plus kid with long arms that's going to have some really good athletic testing numbers. That's a guy that we see get drafted in day 3 all the time at the very least, right? He's another one. Like you mentioned, if Notre Dame's the dominant offense that we think they're going to be this year, maybe there's a chance Blake Fisher comes out. Maybe, if Deion Colsey comes out this year and has 70 catches for 1,200 yards, he's the guy that could come out, right? So there's guys like that. Thomas Harper, to me, is a guy that I'm curious to see what he does in Notre Dame this year, because I think he'll test well and do some things. Chris Tyree's another one who, if he has a really big year, maybe he comes out and he's a day 2, day 3 pick because he's going to run really fast. So there's a lot of guys like that, and the better Notre Dame is, the more likely it is that some of these guys are going to leave early, and that's okay. I think some fans are like, man, I don't want that guy to leave. I'm like, why? Because as long as he leaves for the right reasons, right? Like Kevin Austin leaving was a poor decision. It was not a smart decision. But a lot of these other guys, it's like, why did Isaiah Foskey need to come back for a 5th year? Right. I mean, maybe he gets better as a first-round pick, but he went 40th. It worked out. He's a senior. He got his degree.
Yep.
Right? I mean, maybe, but what if he gets hurt? If Joe Alt is an All-American again next year and he's going to be a top 10 pick, why come back? I mean, and so usually guys leave early if they're leaving for the right reasons. It's because they had a great year. But Notre Dame is at the point now, and I get why Notre Dame fans are that way, because in the past, the guy leaves and you're like, you don't love the replacement. But now it's like, if Riley Mills blows up this year and goes pro, that's awesome for Riley. And you know what that means? That means Jason Onye steps into the starting lineup with Gabriel Rubio the next year, and Notre Dame's still pretty freaking good at defensive tackle, right?
Yep.
And now the young players are stepping up. If Jordan Patelho has a monster 12, 13 sack year, I could see him going pro. That's a good thing, because it means he had a great year, and then they're going to be fine because they've got some guys coming down the pike. So that's the way I look at it, is if Notre Dame's having a bunch of juniors leaving early because they're ready and they're going to be high draft picks, that's great for Notre Dame in a lot of different ways, because 100%. It also, the more that happens, Ryan, the more appealing it is to these high school recruits to come, and the more appealing it is for kids to stay if they're not playing a bunch as freshmen, because they know I'm going to be sitting behind this dude, but that guy's going to be gone after his 3rd year. So I'll stick it out. That's what happens to Bama all the time. It's like, I know I'm that cornerback starting as a sophomore. I'm a freshman, but that dude's that guy's going to leave after his junior year. And then I'm going to have, my chance to shine. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing for Notre Dame. And, it's a very good thing for Notre Dame.
Another good thing for the chat is to not talk about 2024 mock drafts right now with me, because we're not doing that.
It gets him fired up. I am going to have something on 2024 mock drafts tomorrow about Joe Alt that's kind of interesting. And I have seen 12 different Ohio State players mocked in the first round. So Ohio State is about to have the best team in the history of college football, apparently, according to the mock drafts, because they have 12 first-round NFL draft picks on their team next year, which is just, if you can't pick up the sarcasm in my voice right now, then apparently I've lost my touch.
Including all 4 defensive linemen are going in the first round, apparently. So.
All 4 defensive linemen and almost their entire secondary is going. Now, I don't know what happened to their defense last year, because it's almost identical statistically to Notre Dame, who everyone tells me has no NFL players on it. Yeah. But, but apparently Ohio State has 12 NFL players, first-round picks on their roster next year. So they better not lose a game or fire everyone. At least Jack
Kaiser's going in the first round next year, so that's what's up.
I've only seen one guy have that. Is there more
There's
than
actually
one?
Been 2.
Who's the other one? We know the one ridiculous
It was Walter
one.
Football, and then somebody
else
that
came
one. Out with it. Yeah, someone else
That's
did
a little
too.
Nuts.
Yeah.
I you know what, though? I would love for Jack to prove me wrong. I'd see him as at best a day 3 pick, at best. But I would love it if Jack proves me wrong. I like that kid. I really do. I know his family doesn't care much for me because I say critical things of him. But I think Jack's a really good football player. I would love to see him get picked high. So that would be amazing. And it would be great for Notre Dame. I mean, great for Notre Dame to have a linebacker picked in the first round. Are you kidding me?
Oh, sure would.
Be amazing for Notre Dame. I mean, because think about, of all the great, they've had 3 Butkus Award winners in Notre Dame. Not one of them was a first-round draft pick. Now, Jalen would have been, if not for the injury, but they haven't had a single of them be a first-round pick already.
I bet Manti would have been too, if not for the girlfriend stuff as well. But yeah,
I wonder about that. I wonder.
Yeah. I think he would have been. There was a weird perception around him after that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And here's the last one here, Ryan.
From Andre Tonsil, says, if Notre Dame can close on all defensive line recruits, would that cause some players to enter the transfer portal?
Possibly, but look, it's only – here's the thing, Andre, and I get this concern. I think a lot of people have that. But first of all, that's big boy football problems that you want to have, right? Because number one, it means that you've landed some big-time players. But number two, you know what else it means, Ryan? You've weeded out some of your guys who don't want to compete. If a junior or sophomore leaves because you just signed Justin Scott or Elijah Rushing, for example, then you know what? That guy's not a competitor. And here's what I'll say about Tyler Buckner. You say whatever you want about Tyler Buckner, but anyone that says Tyler Buckner didn't want to compete is out of their minds. Because A, if he didn't want to compete, he'd have left after the season. The minute they got Sam Hartman, he'd have left. Number one. Number two, if he didn't want to compete, he's not going to freaking Alabama. Okay? That's the other part. He'd gone to Stanford, which is where I ultimately think he should have gone, to be completely honest with you. If Lorenzo Styles didn't want to compete, he wouldn't go to Ohio State, right? I'm not questioning if Logan Diggs didn't want to compete, he's not wanting to go to LSU. So those kids didn't leave because they want to compete. Getting beat out and then recognizing it and saying going somewhere else is not afraid of competition. Afraid of competition is leaving before the competition happens, before you even get beat out. You can't get beat out if you don't compete, right? You just leave. So you weed out the guys who don't want to compete. That's a great thing. But the other part of it, more realistically, Andre, to your question, is most guys won't leave because you sign somebody. Most guys will leave because those guys come in and they play over you.
And they're dudes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It would only happen if like that happened. And honestly, if I'm a junior and I get beat out by a freshman, I get it. I got no fault to those kids, man. This is the world we live in, right? Go take your chance somewhere else. You know, I'd say get your degree and then do what you got to do. That's kind of where I'm at, Ryan. And that's okay. Like, but you're just not going to see a junior from Notre Dame leaving who is welcome back because they signed Justin Scott. You're right. Like Jason Onye's not bailing because they signed Justin Scott, or Gabriel Rubio's not bailing because they signed Justin Scott. And if they do, okay, guy didn't want to compete, right? It's all good. Either way, you're good, in my opinion, in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you get high level talent, there's going to be some defections from the roster at some point. Like that, you guys got to use. I mean, everyone just needs to get used to that, right? It's like transfers are going to happen when you recruit at this level, because if you're bringing in all that talent, there's going to be some kids that are passed up and aren't going to get opportunities to play. Like it's going to happen. Like that's just a natural occurrence because of it. Like that's a consequence to recruiting so high, and it's going to happen. It's just going to.
And Anthony Crespin in the chat just made a great point, Ryan, and that is we saw it at corner last year. How many corners transferred out of Notre Dame last year?
Just
every single returning cornerback got beat out by Benjamin Morrison. Every single one. Yep. And none of them transferred. Philip Riley.
Oh, he hasn't transferred yet. Yeah.
No, when I went to spring practice, I saw Philip walking to class because he's staying and getting his degree. Yeah. And they gave him that up, but he didn't transfer because he got beat out. He just like, football's not the thing for me. You know, he's going to stay and get his degree, and props to him for that. But none of those kids transferred out because here's the thing too. And this is a great thing to add into this, Ryan. And Andre, with your question, one of the things we explained, I just remember talking to a parent of one of the defensive backs that got beat out by Benjamin Morrison. And he was like, look, we're cool with it because you watch Benjamin Morrison play and you're like, yeah, that dude's special, right? Like that's the other thing is if the next Michael Floyd shows up and you've been relegated second team, most kids are like, yeah, that guy's pretty good. And so I'm going to see it through, get my degree, and then I might leave as a senior or fifth year guy. And that's okay, right? That's fine. But, you know, none of those guys are going to leave just because they're in their feelings about, oh, I got beat out. I mean, or because they brought in some new guy. So, Tyler Buckner is a perfect example. Tyler Buckner didn't leave because they brought in Sam Hartman. He left because Sam Hartman beat him out, and I understand that. And you know, I can I can live with that, right? Both ways. I'm good with what Notre Dame did, and I'm okay with what Tyler did. Whether or not my guidance would have been, my advice to Tyler would be different than what he did. But it's not like, screw Tyler Buckner, just screw Logan Diggs, screw Lorenzo Styles, screw Frank. No, I don't feel anything. I don't feel that way about any of them. I think it was time for Lorenzo to leave. But it doesn't mean I have ill will towards him or mad at him for leaving. I don't have any ill will towards Prince Collie for leaving. I have none at all. The only time I get mad at a kid for leaving is when a kid leaves during a season.
Yeah.
That's it. Or you wait, we pass, the transfer portal closes, all the kids have gone somewhere, and then you quit right before fall camp for some reason. Unless there's some family reason. I mean, a legitimate reason. You're just mad because you're not going to start. So you just quit in the middle of the season. I don't like that.
Yep.
But most of these kids, I have no problem with them leaving. I understand it. It's the world we live in. It's the rules that they're governed by, and they're taking advantage of the rules. How can I fault them for that? I can say the rules are stupid, right? But I can't fault them for that. And if I'm a Notre Dame coach and Logan Diggs told me he wanted to go back closer to home and there was a sit-out rule, he just asked for a waiver because he wanted to be close to home, I'd give him one. Right? Because I don't want a kid in here that's not happy. And that's the thing, is there should be things like that allowed. But most kids that you have at Notre Dame did not come to Notre Dame because they're afraid of competition.
Yep.
If you didn't want to compete, this is not the place for you. And there have been kids like that, but they left almost immediately. The kids that are staying are kids that understand, I came here because I knew I was going to have to compete, and that's part of the deal. And if Justin Scott, and they'll be accepting of those younger kids. I mean, that's the other thing too. How many times have we heard about veteran offensive players or veteran players taking younger guys under their wing that they knew might beat them out?
Yep.
It's why? Because they're leaders, they're high character people, and they're also competitors. Yeah, this kid's going to come, he's talented, and he's going to battle, but I'm pretty good too, and I'm going to compete. And that's the kind of players you want. Like I've heard tons of stories about how DJ Brown was so instrumental in when Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts moved over. Well, why the heck would he help them? They're trying to take his job because he's a leader. Yep. And that's what leaders do. And that's why I have no problem bringing a kid like him back for a sixth year, even though I don't think he's a great football player. But like, that's the kind of guy I want more of on my team. I don't want all 85 guys like that because I want some guys that are also freaky athletes. But you need some guys like that on your football team, in my opinion. Like if J.D. Bertrand got legitimately beat out by a younger player, I don't think it would change how he goes about his leadership at all. I think he would still be exactly the same leader he was. Now, I don't think he'd be happy about getting beat out, but that's just the kind of guy that I believe J.D. Bertrand is. And Notre Dame has a lot of kids like that. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to enjoy getting beat out, but they just understand there's a bigger purpose here. And I think that's why you just wouldn't see it leave. Like somebody brought up Jacob Lacey. Yeah, I had a problem with that. I had a problem with the way Jacob left. I did. You quit on your team in the middle of the year. You can give me whatever reason you want, and I have no ill will towards Jacob. But I think that's a bad look, in my opinion. That's a really bad look. I don't like that. Once you commit to your team during the season, you see that through, in my opinion. But I know that I'm probably in the minority there, but that's my take on that. So anyway, Ryan, that's it. Why don't you take us out of here?
I want to thank everybody for all the great mailbag questions and being with us today on the podcast. Make sure before you leave, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that nice little notification bell at the bottom because you'll know when one of our upcoming shows are coming every day at 1 o'clock Eastern, or if you want to stick around for IB Nation Sports Talk every night at 6 o'clock Eastern time. Make sure to also go to irishbreakdown.com and go to the boards at irishbreakdown.com, the Champions League, where you can get a lot of great intel, conversations, and of course, go to irishbreakdown.com for any of the daily content that we put out here. So from Brian, I am Ryan. Thank you all so much for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.